puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And this time we're covering, what is it? We Three Kings of, no, it's not Three Kings, it's Five Kings. No, it's One Kings. One Kings. When One Kings 5, when One Kings time 5, that would be Five Kings.
That is correct. That's exactly what we're covering. Good job, Aaron. Everyone give a round of applause to Aaron.
I sense sarcasm.
No.
Surely not.
Do we have any opening comments?
Oh, well, we're finally going to get around to that temple that the law keeps referring to that apparently hasn't existed yet. So that's always fun. And of course, there has to be, drama and mythical setup for this totally real, not at all mythical story.
And because it's about the temple, there are some ancient commentaries that go wild on this. And in the event that Tomer is not already prepared with that, I've got some very juicy stuff that,
1, 2,
anyway,
3, 4,
I can't wait
5,
to
6,
share.
7. I have 7 Christians.
Wow, he brought 7 Christians this time. That's crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you doing penance? Have you committed a great sin? Are you? Is there something you must make up for?
I'm a Jew.
We've got them.
There's a lot of blasphemy that Tomer's been doing.
Yeah.
That sounds very auto-anti-Semitic, if you ask me.
That is Christianity, though. I mean, let's be honest.
That's right.
Yeah. I meant
Okay,
that I
so
don't care
who is
because
reading today?
I suppose I can read it. Although I am quite tired. I got up 15 minutes ago. I panicked, thinking that, oh no, I'm late for the show. I wasn't, but I almost was. But yeah, I guess I can read it. But I did get a paper done. I was working on. Actually, I think this is like one of the first papers that I've had to write in school that is actually related to what I want to do. So it's like directly related to what I want to do. So it was about the I got to write about the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Like I got to write like an actual like kind of critical paper about the Acts of Paul and Thecla. So
Oh my God, that's amazing.
yeah, it was it's called the subversion of the Greek novel in the Acts of Paul and Thecla. So how the author like flipped certain themes of Greek romances on their head, and like because of the themes that were flipped, you could kind of tell what the author was going for.
Yeah.
So I actually
Well,
got to write like a paper on it. So the paper was supposed to be 5 to 7 pages. Mine turned out to be 10. So
are you and I the only people on the panel who have read the Acts of Paul and Thecla?
I'm not sure. But I have a video on the Acts of Paul and Thecla. It's just called the Cult of Saint Thecla.
Yeah, it's
where I talk about the story.
There are some good things about Gnostic Christianity, but one of the not so great things that was all about total sexual abstinence, even after you're married. If you get married, they're really weird about it. So yeah, Christianity has always been about fucking up sex from day one.
Yeah, it's not. The thing is, it's not even necessarily Gnostic. It's just an apocryphal text.
No.
But it's
yeah, but you see that universally in the Gnostic texts as well as in Paul and Thecla, although like you say, it's not explicitly Gnostic. It was definitely a meme, shall we say.
It's quite fun. But anyways, I did get to finish that yesterday. So on to chapter 5.
Huzzah.
Now.
And I should.
Okay. He's got it already.
No, I was just saying a remark because in the Masoretic text, this is 5:15 through what is it, 33? 32. So just a heads up.
Yeah. The numbering is different.
Yeah, it is.
So, now King Hiram of Tyre sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend to David. Solomon sent word to Hiram, saying, You know that my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until he put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. So I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. As the Lord said to my father David, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. Therefore, command that cedars from the Lebanon be cut for me. My servants will join your servants, and I will give you whatever wages you set for your servants. For you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. Wow, what a stereotype. When
Just
I'm a
Hiram,
Sidonian and I'm
It's a-
okay.
I sleep all night and I work all
Yeah,
day.
Sorry.
when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be the Lord today, who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people. Hiram sent word to Solomon, I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I will fulfill all your needs in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. My servants shall bring it down to the sea from the Lebanon. I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you indicate. I will have them broken up there for you to take away, and you shall meet my needs by providing food for my household. So Hiram supplied Solomon's every need for timber of cedar and cypress. Solomon, in turn, gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20 cores of fine oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. So the Lord gave Solomon wisdom. So as he had promised him. There was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. King Solomon conscripted forced labor out of all Israel. The levy numbered 30,000 men. He sent them to the Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in the Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram, Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon also had 70,000 laborers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 supervisors who were over the work, having charge of the people who did the work. At the king's command, they quarried out great costly stone in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stone. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the Gebalites did the stone cutting and prepared the timber and the stone prepare the timber and the stone to build the house. So that is the end of the chapter. But I mean this theme about getting the cedars from Lebanon, that's gonna happen multiple times. That was a very popular place to get timber.
The cedars of Lebanon are indeed a trope, although it's important to remember that they are not the kind of cedars you see in North America. So the next time someone tries to pull the Job BS about the behemoth having a giant thick tail, look at the cedars of Lebanon, that style of cedar. It looks exactly like an elephant's tail.
Yeah, people have went back and forth so much about that.
And it's just a trope. The cedars of Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon. It's a famous trope. Exactly. They've been growing cedars forever.
And that was the wisdom that he received, right? Like, if you're going to build my temple, you've got to import the labor and the products. Because locally, you've got garbage here, surely.
This is something that's not generally talked about though. Like, so while everyone does say like, in the Bible Solomon builds a temple, sure, but there are actually like a lot of groups working on the temple. It's not just like the Israelites working on it.
No. And like, admittedly, you needed God to give you the grand, amazing wisdom to trade with your neighbors for what you need. Whoever thought?
Yeah, it was like, Moses led them in the desert for 40 years, and he led them to the one place in the Middle East without any oil.
Yeah, or timber. God is kind of a jackass.
Natural resources.
That's what makes the building of it there so miraculous, Isaac.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because nothing but the worst for God's people. But admittedly, then the whole trope with the forced labor on rotation, this reminds me very much of the Egyptian system of labor, which again the pyramids were not built by slaves, much less Hebrew slaves, but they did have systems where they would hire like farmers during the season when the Nile flooded all the fields, and you weren't going to do shit because it's flooded. You're just waiting for the pull out. Exactly, to go and do labor on, the tombs of the pharaohs and the pyramids and the obelisks and whatever other fucking building project their egos demanded that day. So whereas we have some record though that at least there was pay there, this appears to have been not so much.
A form of tax,
I'll tax you by enslaving you on rotation. You can go back to your fields when I don't need you.
Now, what do we make of this King Hiram of Tyre? I ran into that there is an inscription, like, is this a historical character, right? You might wonder. An Akkadian inscription of Tiglath-Pileser III by him in the years 747 to 727 BC that mentions a king of Hiram of Tyre. And it's a Phoenician inscription from Cyprus. But they do note here in the Anchor Bible that it's not the actual biblical character. So somehow they have disassociated this guy from.
It's off by about 250 to 300 years. So
right.
Maybe it's based on him. The idea of it seems very much that the Bible writers seem to think that every place that has a king, the kings, like those nations that have kings, the kings all have the same name. It's the Pharaoh of Egypt. It's always the Pharaoh.
And you'd have a house like Ramses. How many Ramses were there? How many King Richards or Henrys or George?
Well, I mean, it makes sense, the idea. It's possible that the word Pharaoh could have been a personal name at one point in history, or something like that. I think I've seen that somewhere.
Well,
like Caesar.
Caesar becomes Kaiser and Tsar.
Wasn't the word Pharaoh meant to be like a derogatory term? Like, that's not something the Egyptians would have called their king. They would have just called him king or queen.
It was funny. I actually got into an argument with some Muslims last night. And we were specifically talking. So we were specifically talking about, like, first of all, their definition of God means that there necessarily has to be one. Like, their definition of a god, like other to them, like polytheism isn't like a real thing, because like you can't have multiple gods. They think that's impossible. At least the ones I was talking to, and I'm like, but they define God in a different way. But anyways, so the we were
defining
talking about,
a being as necessary does not make it real.
Well, yeah, I know. So the so one of the things that came up was like the differences between kings and pharaohs, and I'm like, well, the thing is, like, pharaohs were like the kings of Egypt, and after a back and forth where they were saying, well, that they had like a different like purpose, they had a different like title. I'm like, well, the thing is, if I'm ever talking about like the king of Egypt at a certain time, I'm talking about whoever the pharaoh was. Like in Egypt, like it's an Egypt specific term, yes, but like it's not like functionally different. And then he was like, one of them said something about pharaohs being specifically like divine or something. And I'm like, well, yeah, they did think that, but like the kings of Egypt thought they were divine. And
Doesn't make them not kings.
he was saying that there was like a time period where they didn't have pharaohs, but they had kings. And I'm like, I can't think of a single time period where any historian would say that they had a king, but not a pharaoh.
And there's also like the idea of the king being divine, or the emperor, or the sultan, or the pharaoh, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it looks
very much
like the
thing.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Like
I mentioned also the divine right of kings, and yeah, it was
my next thought.
Yeah.
Stop reading my mind.
It looks like the word pharaoh isn't used for like early Egyptian kings. It's not the first time we see it is like the time of Akhenaten.
Is it a?
And it means like great house. Word? Yeah, it means great house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds just like the dynasty taking over from like infighting tribes and actually establishing itself. But we should probably get back to Israel.
Egyptians used king more often than they used pharaoh, up until like the 18th dynasty even. So yeah.
Okay.
But we are in the Bible, and let's get back to the Jews.
Yeah.
Right, let's go.
Yeah. Let me just check. Okay. So the procedure when I say verse 1, which is verse 15, I'm referring to verse 1 of the Old Testament, which is verse 15 in the Hebrew Bible or the Masoretic text. Okay. So I'll start on verse 1, which is 15. Hiram, king of Tyre. The name Hiram is taken to be an abbreviated form of Ahiram, attested for a king of Byblos, circa 1200 BCE. Fritz notes that outside the Bible, Hiram is only mentioned in the writings of Menander of Ephesus, circa 2nd century BC, as quoted by Josephus in Against Appian 118. According to this, quote, Hiram was the second ruler of a dynasty founded by his father that came to an end with his grandson Abdastratos, son of Beleazar, end quote. Beleazar. And that he ruled from 969 through 936 BCE, roughly parallel with Solomon. Thus, quote, the excerpt from the lost history of Menander of Ephesus demonstrates the historicity of this ruler as a contemporary of Solomon, end quote. Sweeney writes that by the mid-10th century BCE, Tyre had emerged as the dominant Phoenician city under Hiram. On verse 3, which is 17, until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. In the Masoretic text, Ketiv reads his feet, in Hebrew raglo, and the Kere reads my feet, in Hebrew raglai. The Ketiv reading is attested by all early translations. Kimchi explains, quote, the Ketiv is about David, for David had enemies under the soles of his feet. The Kere is about Solomon, meaning, I am a man of peace, and I had no war, and I have time to build the house, end quote. Cogan and Sweeney prefer the Ketiv reading, with the former writing that it fits the context, where Solomon explains why he was the one who built the temple. He also notes that such a figure of speech was used by Shalmaneser III and Thutmose IV.
So there you go. You're copying tropes and phrases from Egyptian rulers and other rulers and histories. It's there's sort of this I'm reminded of something that C.S. Lewis actually wrote, that the person who says I'm as good as you never believes it. The toy poodle doesn't say or the Saint Bernard never says to the toy poodle, I'm as good as you. The pretty woman doesn't say it to the plain. The smart man doesn't say it to the stupid. It's something that shows insecurity. And this sort of trying to copy everyone, but pretending you did it better. It speaks very much of trying to hype oneself up, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on verse 5, which is 19, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God. Fritz comments, the idea of the presence of the name of Yahweh in the temple is part of the typical Deuteronomic theology. as we see in Deuteronomy 12:11, 14:23, 16:2, 6, and 11. Thus, the presence of the transcendent God in the temple is emphasized. The author is eager to anchor the temple theology already firmly in the preparation and planning of the building. Organizational and economic problems are therefore pushed to the background and are emphasized only toward the end of the narrative. Just a second.
Wow.
Okay.
Tomer's really slacking here.
Yeah, I know. Sorry,
Shamir.
I was distracted. Sorry.
You were just.
How dare you, sir?
Yes, I was.
He saw an equation somewhere, and he's like, "Oh my god, I must solve it."
Yeah, that kind of begs the question now, like what were you
Kinda.
distracted about?
Kinda. Okay. On 6, which is 20, Cedars of Lebanon. Sweeney comments. Solomon proposes that Hiram cut cedars of Lebanon, known throughout the ancient world for their beauty, strength, and height, and thus for their value as a highly prized building material. Later, Assyrian and Babylonian monarchs would routinely bring their armies to Phoenicia to cut such trees, so that they might be used in building projects at home. Solomon offers to pay for the wages of Hiram's workmen at whatever rate that Hiram might ask. Although such an offer seems a bit naive, it highlights the high esteem in which the Lebanese cedars were held. Solomon spares no expense to get the best.
Yeah, interestingly, this, as well as we just mentioned about like other kings coming in and getting wood, they didn't seem to have the concept of the trees belong to the king, for example. Like he's going to pay the locals to harvest the resources, but the resources themselves don't need to be paid for, it seems. At least it's not implied in the text that this was something that he needed to do. So
I want to mention on this one how this concept of purchasing expensive materials and bringing things from out of town for building Solomon's temple is oftentimes used as part of the rhetoric and argument for actually funding very expensive church buildings. And worst of all, hiring, which one that it affects me directly because it has to do with part of the reason why I never went back to work as a minister, which is how like churches will import worship pastors, like celebrity status, into their church.
Oh God,
they
yeah,
use
the
this
song speaking tour type of thing. Ugh.
Yeah, exactly. So,
sorry, yeah, they use this. Explain how they use it, because it's so the cringe it's making me.
Yeah, if Solomon spared no expense to build God's temple, right, and he used expensive, luxurious materials like cedar from Lebanon, that surely us, the church builders, ought to be, justify our luxurious church buildings nowadays.
Yeah, just like also, Solomon, forced all these 30,000 men into forced labor. So too will we employ volunteers to help build our church.
Employ volunteers.
It's a sacrifice we're willing to make.
Oh, it's a tithe of your time and effort. And then you get to see an old man in a dress open to, rock concert lights like this every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
What was that Crystal Tower? They've been doing that for so long. The old guy there, he must be dead now. I hope he's dead. But he would do that. He literally wore the old drape and would
sounds like something Aaron would do. Not gonna lie.
You're right.
No, Aaron would have more fire like jets.
Yeah.
Aaron would do it cooler, cheaper, and he wouldn't be screwing over the poor to do it.
Right.
Mm.
This means like
okay.
The energy.
On that same verse, we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians. Cogan writes that Sidonians is a general term for all Phoenicians, and writes that their speciality in felling timber and their transport was preserved as a monopoly. He notes that an administrative Assyrian letter from the 8th century BCE contains a report to the king about the trouble he has had enforcing the restrictions on sales of wood brought down from the Lebanon through the port of Sidon.
Like, I understand that they're great. They're great at cutting wood. They're great woodcutters, the best woodcutters. But I would think that instead of isn't it more likely that he got the timber from them because they're nearby and not because because it's really good timber and not because they're just the best at cutting it? I feel like them being right there probably
Are you
makes.
assuming that they're not?
Am I assuming? I don't know if they're not.
It's the
Sounds like
best
you
in the
are.
region. They would be best at cutting their own timber of the local tribe. I mean,
it totally makes sense to be like, hey, you're right there, and this is very good timber, so I'll take it.
Yeah.
So
that's
in the
capitalism.
Bible, Sidon is in the Bible. It's taken
In
that
that case,
Sidon
I
is
hate it.
named
Good.
after a person, right? The Bible thinks that Sidon is named after the son of Canaan, which makes sense. He they were Canaanites, but in a sense, the Phoenicians saw themselves as being Canani, whatever. They spoke the same language pretty much, and writing system is the same. But we know that the name Sidon or Sidon, whatever, it means like fishing town. Like it's not named after a person.
No.
Although that's interesting though. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in here that's kind of anachronistic, really. So, I mean, hell, even the purpose of the town might have changed over time. There's gonna be a part later that talks about furnishing the bronze for the temple, but the town that has been associated with it, it was known in the it's unclear from the stuff that I read on it so far. I'm gonna look into it more. I'm not sure if we'll get to it today. But at some point it was definitely used for casting bronze, this town, because they have the things for it. But it's unclear when that was used. So it might have been in the early centuries, or it might have been later. So I'll have to look into that a bit more. But
it does place it, Bronze Age aesthetics at the very least. Fringe Iron Age, but we're talking just the edge of that. So.
Okay, on 7, which is 21, praised be to the Lord today. This phrase might seem odd, given that Hiram was supposed to be a pagan or a foreigner. Sweeney writes that Hiram's praise of Yahweh would be expected in the context of international relations in the ancient world. Cogan writes that acknowledgement of foreign gods was accepted in the polytheistic world of the ancient Near East. DeVries, however, does not take the phrase as, quote, a language of treaty documents, end quote, but that it is DH's adaptation of a popular pious expression, with today, hayom, added to the blessing formula, as we see in 1 Samuel 25, 32 and 33, and 1 Kings 1:48, in such a way as to make it modify the act of blessing rather than Yahweh's act of appointing Solomon.
So you're thinking he said something like, blessed be the gods of blah, 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 both our tribes or something and then they adapted it to just be Yahweh because we can't have any of those other dirty gods messing up the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty typical.
On 8, which is 22, juniper logs. Although Solomon does not mention juniper or cypress trees, in Hebrew broshim, in his request, Hiram nevertheless sends them to him. Fritz writes that their wood was probably used for paneling as well as for the floors, since it was easier to cut. On 9, which is 23, rafts. In Hebrew, dovrot, which is a hapax. Rashi comments, they would tie logs together and float them on the water and sail them in the same manner as ships are sailed. 2 Chronicles 2:15 has the word rafsodot instead, which is also a hapax. It also adds that these rafts reached Jaffa, and from there the logs were transported overland to Jerusalem. Cogan writes that this was a procedure associated with the building of the post-exilic temple, as we see in Ezra 3:7. On 11, which is 25, 20,000 cores of wheat. Modern estimations value it at around 2,200 square meters, according to Cogan, or about 800 tons, according to Fritz. DeVries takes this amount to be, quote, not at all excessive for a large establishment, end quote, but Fritz takes it to be an exaggeration by DH, since Israel was hardly able to produce such a large surplus. He writes that the details of the exchange of goods do not stem from an actual historical source, but are rather vague and imprecise.
And wildly exaggerated.
Although one argument that I've read was that because the Sidon they concentrated much of their efforts into maritime industries, such as transportation, that the offering of like agricultural products kind of makes sense for them to barter something that they would not have been able to produce themselves.
And if they're using a lot of land to, tend trees, it is a renewable resource, but it takes many years. And you have to keep planting if you want to have, more trees in the future. So they would be using up a lot of their land in the maintenance of their cedars if they want it to last more than one generation. And they did. So
on that same verse, 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. The Masoretic text reads 20 cores of beaten oil. The Masoretic text reading is attested by most early translations. Likewise, Josephus in Antiquities 857 has many batoi of oil. The reading's baths is accepted by DeVries, who takes it to be a more reasonable tally than the Masoretic text. He takes the MT reading to be a lithography from the preceding 20,000 cores of wheat, and the Greek translations would simply have copied and not try to correct their vorlage. However, most modern commentators preserve the Masoretic text, with Cogan, at least according to the Anchor Bible version, writing that 20,000 baths looks much too high. On 12, which is 26, Fritz comments, the final comment states the agreement between the two partners and describes the economic exchange as a covenant, that is, a treaty between equal partners. The choice of words fits the general nomenclature of DH. The economic relationship is styled as a peace treaty. Finally, the verse
nomenclature, not nomenclature.
No, nomenclature. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
It's for some reason I had the wrong word. The economic relationship is styled as a peace treaty. Finally, the verse repeats the picture of the wise king and adds it to the notion of the peaceful treaty-making king.
God is so inconsistent. He wants them to come in and kill everyone. He gets mad at them for accidentally making a treaty with locals. But then David can't build his temple because he's a man of blood. And Solomon has to build his temple because he's a man of peace. But he went and made all those treaties because God made him wise. But then they made him stumble with other gods and led to the downfall of the entire, country being a unified front under the line of David. God will not make up his damn mind.
What just shows that, a handful of humans are more powerful than God and can undo everything God wants done.
And then he'll want something else. So,
Yep.
And while it's not okay to mix fabrics like cotton with something else, it's all right to mix different kinds of woods and bring them from all over the place to build the sanctuary.
I'm going to build a house out of mahogany and balsa.
Which is also the same woods that my guitar is made of. Anyway, on verse 13, which is 27, Sweeney comments, the use of forced labor in service of the state is well known in Solomon's kingdom and throughout the ancient Near East world. It must be considered as a form of taxation that appears alongside requirements to present a certain percentage of one's crops and other goods to the state. The numbers and organization of the corvée are designed so that they will not impose an excessively heavy burden on the population. When compared to the census totals presented in 2 Samuel 24:9, 800,000 men in Israel, 500,000 men in Judah, the 30,000 men employed in the corvée does not seem to be excessive.
Not excessive.
On 14, which is 28, this verse seems to contradict what is said in verse 9, which is 23, that Hiram does not need workers from Israel. Cogan notes Montgomery and Gammon's opinion that the Israelites eventually provided the raw labor for the skilled Phoenicians. Fritz notes that it is unclear why it is stated that the workers spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. He writes that the addition is probably not based on an authentic remark, but it is equally impossible to find a reason for a later addition. He suggests that, quote, the participation of Solomon in the organization of the timber is intended to limit the role of Hiram during the building of the temple, end quote. He concludes that the note in verses 13 through 14, which is 27 through 28 in the Hebrew Bible, quote, is hardly reliable and probably an invention of the later narrator, end quote. Somebody wanted to speak.
Does anyone else think that 80,000 stone cutters is a bit much? 80,000?
All the numbers are exaggerated. Like, I just take that as written at this point. Everything is 10 times, 30 times. It's bragging. It's like, deranged Cheeto talking about his massive numbers at his rallies. And, if you just stand just so and only film just down.
Adding 3 or 4 floors to the size of his tower.
Yeah, exactly. And if you take a picture just right, it almost looks like it's full, but the minute you look around, you're like, oh fuck no, this is empty as hell.
There's actually a clip where he says that, and the cameraman at that point decides to pan around, and you can see how empty it really is.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. On 16, which is 30, Cogan writes that based on the large number of prefect officers, in Hebrew Sarei HaNitzavim, this refers to officers who the prefects appointed to supervise the workers in Lebanon, 1 officer for every 10 workers, and chief officer, in Hebrew Ravsar, for every 10 officers. According to 923, there were 550 officers involved, and from the context, they were Israelite officers who supervised the Canaanite corvée. But here, this refers to officers who oversaw 30,000 Israelites who worked in Lebanon. According to 2 Chronicles 2:17, there were, quote, 3,600 supervisors to see that the people worked, end quote. But in 2 Chronicles 8:10, quote, these were King Solomon's prefects, 254 men over the people, end quote. According to Montgomery and Gammon, a later writer added 30,000 workers from Israel, in verse 27, and another 150,000 Canaanite recruits, in verse 29. Overall, 180,000 supervised workers, according to the ratio 550 to 30,000. He calculated that 3,300 overseers would be necessary for 180,000 workers. Cogan writes, quote, even if these numbers are unrealistic, the writer who calculated them believed in them, end quote.
People really will believe the weirdest shit to promote their propaganda.
And here's the thing, this is no different than other kings in antiquity. They would spend the majority of their time building stuff because that's their duty. That's part of the legacy. That's how they, right? It's like a peeing contest or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and there's, they didn't have this concept of the immortality of the soul in those days. Your works would survive you, your glory in battle. There's a reason why the arch that Nebuchadnezzar built, he had his name printed on the bricks on the inside where they wouldn't necessarily be sown, so that if any later king tried to claim, I built this arch, blah, 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 you could, the minute they open it up, they're like, bitch, Nebuchadnezzar's name is right here. And clearly that was something that happened a lot. People would claim that this or that thing was theirs. People would try and build great things or do great deeds so that their name would live on in memory. And having children was potentially part of that too. So it's a striving for, if not proper immortality, at least to reach beyond your own time and place and to make a mark. And many great and many horrid things have been inspired by that desire.
Okay, on 17, which is 31, dressed stone. In Hebrew, it's avnei gazit. Gersonides comments, they were sculpted with iron tools in such a way that their sides were straight and their angles were perpendicular, for with it the building is well established. End quote. DeVries wrote that the term avnei gazit refers to ashlar, when squared off rock. Yeah. He writes, quote, these special stones were designated for the lower levels of masonry, possibly leaving the upper levels to be completed with brick or with smaller stones. End quote. Fritz notes that the method of using square-hewed stones appeared in the early monarchy, during the Second Iron Period, and probably shows Phoenician influence. He writes, quote, the use of dressed stones for the foundation emphasizes the precious character of the building, since the foundations were normally made from undressed stones, end quote. Undressed stones, end quote.
Yeah, the scholar that writes the article on the Anchor Bible says that the structure of the temple and its locations adjoining the royal palace show that Solomon built the temple following the tradition of the Canaanite Phoenician temples in the end of the second millennium and beginning of the first millennium BC.
I'm sorry. Did you say it was exactly like all the other polytheistic gods in the region and in no way distinct or special in any imaginable capacity until they afterwards decided that they should retcon the whole thing?
Just the same.
I'm shocked. This is my shocked face.
Okay. Sorry. I think it wasn't Gassan, this was Kimchi, but okay, never mind. On 18, which is 32, workers from Byblos. Hebrew Givlim. Givlim, yeah. Vaticanus has
Yeah, I'm
Givlim,
saying that's more like the Hebrew place name is Geval or something like that.
Yeah, Givli, but yeah, I guess. Okay,
from,
so
Gebel or Gebel, yeah.
Yeah, Gebel, something like that. Vaticanus has, they bordered them with grooved edges, reading Vayigvilum. While this emendation is preferred by DeVries, who reads, and Hiram's builders did the shaping, most commentators take Gebel as referring to Jabil in the Lebanon coast, between Beirut and Tripoli, which the Greeks called Byblos. Thus, Rashi comments, quote, a nation whose name was Geval, and they were skilled in chiseling stones in building, end quote. Fritz notes that during the third millennium, this city exercised great influence on the city-states along the Levantine coast. He writes, quote, despite the late character of the passage, this information is probably correct, because archaeology has shown the spread of Phoenician building techniques. This note indicates knowledge of Phoenician participation during the building of the temple. Because of the character of the temple as the sole place for sacrifice, this knowledge was most likely not invented. In the following report of the building of the temple, this cooperation is not mentioned again. Oh, and
they do seem to wash out any other involvement as much as they can, minimize and co-opt.
Oh, and there is an interesting, I've added an optional comment here. Targum reads master masons, interestingly enough. Harrington and Saldarini explained that the Aramaic for master masons in Hebrew al-govlaya contains the root letters of the name Gebal. Dre writes that another motif may be involved. Quote, By leaving these men unnamed, they have no real identity. They are just generic craftsmen, they are just generic craftsmen. Once named, they are recognized as Gentiles, but not Hiram, who had a Jewish mother, 714. As such, they are not the people whom the Targumist might wish to see as builders of the temple, which was the epitome of Jewish piety. Similar sensitivities are reflected in a Talmudic passage, Avodah Zarah 59a, where Gevala is a place about which concern is expressed because of the cohabiting of Israelite women with heathens, quote-unquote, with the result that their children were illegitimate, quote-unquote.
Oh, yes. Controlling by making sure they can't get our women because they're property. That's not creepy at all.
Okay, now the Christians. So I have first with Prudentius, who lived circa 4th and 5th centuries, wrote in a poem version, in poem style, that the temple was built by Solomon after the destruction of his enemies, when peace had been restored in Israel, and in the same way the church was built in the peace following the victory against earthly vices.
Okay there, buddy. Jesus Christ. Uh-huh.
Bede wrote that the servants of Hiram who cut the wood of Lebanon represent the teachers chosen among the Gentiles in order to correct and convert the nations to the obedience and doctrine of Christ. Ephraim wrote that Solomon foreshadows in his act of building the temple the spiritual construction of the church accomplished by Jesus through his saving actions.
Yep.
Bede wrote that the fact that Solomon summoned people from all districts of Israel demonstrates that priests must be chosen from the entire community of the Christians and not only from certain specific groups. Ephraim wrote that the number of the stonecutters and laborers symbolizes the host of angels sent by God to help us in our Christian battles. And Jerome adds, as well as apostolic preaching, the Gospels, and the Trinity. And Bede again writes that the costly and square stones used to make the foundations of the temple are figures of the teachers of the church who build the spiritual church through their holy preaching.
If apologists like shoveling shit this much, why aren't they just farmers? They would actually do something useful for the world.
I want to say that authors of the New Testament missed out an opportunity here. They could have commented on this passage saying, we wouldn't have needed 3,300 supervisors because the Holy Spirit would have just ran the whole thing.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit is a special snowflake.
Yeah.
So are we ready to move on to the next one?
Yes.
6 kings? Okay. Yes.
6 kegs.
This one's going to be quite technical.
What?
This one's quite technical.
Yeah. So
Is it?
No, it's not no difficult names
Yeah,
or
so
anything.
read until. Yeah, it's basically the building of the temple. So of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
So read until 13. So read through 13 or until 13 or whatever.
In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. And of course, his wife said it's not big enough. The vestibule in the front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits wide across the width of its house, of the width of the house. Its depth was 10 cubits in front of the house. For the house he made windows with recessed frames. He also built a structure against the wall of the house, running around the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary. And he made side chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits wide, the middle one 6 cubits wide, and the third 7 cubits wide. We building an upside-down pyramid here? For around the outside of the house, he made offsets in the wall in order that the supporting beams should not be inserted into the walls of the house. Why would you want them to be load-bearing? The house was built with stone, finished at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. They used crazy. The entrance of the lower story was on the south side of the house. One went up by winding stairs to the middle story, from the middle story to the third. So he built the house and finished it. He roofed the house with beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, each story 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. And it sank into the swamp. So they built another one. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house you are building. If you will walk in my statutes, obey my ordinances, and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my promise with you that I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and will not forsake my people of Israel, despite all the times previously that I'd already promised to do that and then reneged on it. I promise I'll stick to my promise this time.
Yeah.
God is nothing if not consistent in his bullshit.
Sorry, my version had the extra words in there.
God's promises will last forever as long as you don't, by forever we mean tomorrow.
I have altered the arrangements of our deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Oh God, yes.
So
you and I and the pop culture references. I love you so much.
Yeah. So the structure that's being described here is very similar to the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle was like this rectangle that had like a square at the back, like the inner sanctum and then the outer sanctum, and then it was just surrounded by a curtain on the outside. And then this one, it's got a very similar layout, but then there's like an extra room at the front, which the translation called the vestibule. Mm-hmm. And it also says that it was 30 cubits high, but it's not very clear if the 30 cubits is like the height of, because afterwards it says that the inner sanctum is only like 10 cubits high, right? So it's like almost like a perfect cube. So it's not unsure if like the 30 cubits is like the height of the like the other room, the room in front of it, the larger room, or maybe it's referring just to the hall in front, like the tallest part of it was 30 high, and maybe the inner side was 20. But I mean, I kind of imagine that the building is like 30 almost cubits tall. The inner holies is only 10 cubits tall because they needed space above it to do like the mechanisms and stuff, to hide away the behind the curtain stuff,
Yeah, you need the Deus Ex Machina and the ropes and pulleys and the pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Now, am I also getting the right picture here? Does it read sort of like it's annexed to his palace, like not an isolate building?
No. So in this chapter, the word house, the house, that's referring to the temple as a whole, or it's referring to the building that is divided into these two separate sections with a vestibule in front of the house. So the length of the vestibule is against the width of the house. So that's just the house is the temple.
Okay, but this was an annex to his palace.
No,
right?
It's like a freestanding structure.
Okay.
So you've got this rectangle structure. That's the east side is the vestibule, is like the entrance hall. Then you have a doorway. Then you have the sort of rectangle room with that would have like the candelabra and the another little incense altar. And then there was that cube at the back, which is like the inner sanctuary, which has the altar in it, the altar. And then it says that they're around the outside of this building. So you would think of like the back and the sides is this 3 story structure that's like kind of like an annex, and it's kind of almost like a lean-to where the walls of the main building are wider at the bottom and they kind of get successively narrower, so that the floor beams of this outside structure is like resting on top of the wall rather than inserting beams into the wall, which is what you normally would do, right? If you were building, let's say, a castle, you'd have your stone walls, and then you would have like a few holes here and here where you would put your wood in, and then the floor would go on those beams. So here it's like, it's actually a very normal thing to do, to build your walls wider at the bottom, because if you want to build tall, 30 cubits tall is very tall. If you want to build that tall, you need it to be quite a wide wall. But actually, if you build it wide at the bottom and then make it narrower, it's not as heavy. So actually, it's more, it supports itself. And actually, if you look at like really old churches and stuff, you can see how there's like the bottom of the building is always wider, and then it gets narrower. And then later they discovered the whole idea of you don't need the whole wall to be as wide, only some parts of it. So you have like a thin wall, and then you have like these bits that stick out. They're called buttresses.
Like a buttress, yeah.
Yeah. And then later on, they discovered that they can have the buttress as just a freestanding pillar with an arch connecting to the top of the wall, and that's called a flying buttress, which is one of my favorite words. Like if you go to like Notre Dame, you'll see they have a bunch of flying buttresses.
Very very Gothic vibe.
So
that allows them
evidently
to build really tall.
Solomon didn't have this technology, so he had to
No.
outsource.
He didn't even have buttresses. He had the whole wall the whole wall was wide at the bottom, and then a little bit narrower, so that, and that also allowed them that there was little annex structure, which is like 3 stories tall of like little chambers, probably used for like storage and stuff. Those would have been they would have like rested on the wider part of the wall. So
it seems to be saying somehow that it's better though not to have any holes for cross beams.
Yeah, it seems
not to have any hammers in the special
Yeah.
holy site. I mean, they refer to it as like a palace for God. Like, David's like, I have this great palace. God should have one. And then that's the whole argument for the building of the temple. But it's, I
guess it would have been like, you wouldn't have, if you wanted to make holes in the wall, stone walls, you would have had to, use chisels to actually do that. And you wouldn't have done that at the quarry. You would have had to have done that when you were ready to put the pillars in, right? So it was easier for them to just make a wide wall and then another course of stone on top, which is slightly narrower, and it just makes sense, I guess.
Because God loves the scream of babies being genocided, but he does not like to hear hammers in the morning.
That's interesting too. I mean, is that sort of claiming that all these stones came miraculously and they fit all together nicely without any adjusting?
Well, once we'll get to verse 7, there is an interesting note that there is a specific method in which the stones were chiseled, and
or
this
they
is a
were
surprise. Isaac, don't
cut with skill, and you can do that. Intelligent people will do that.
There's one explanation
for assembly.
Yeah, Tom is going to give another explanation, but the other explanation is just like all the stones were cut in the quarry, and then it was all done precisely that when they got it to the building thing, they just put the stones together in the right order and it will fit, and they didn't have to do anything.
Prefab. It was like a prefab house.
Like a more interesting alternative method.
Yeah.
Cool. So
Aaron should maybe read some comments.
Alrighty then. Let's see. We have Razor Sharp Rust offers £1.99 and says Aaron's beard reminds me of an early Billy Connolly, which I don't mind because I liked early Billy Connolly. And then Tammy B offers $10 Australian and says, "Good morning, Aaron." Hi. Thank you very much. All right. Is it time to read on?
No.
Why not?
Because Parshanut. Okay, so on verse.
I just want to say that the little chambers that were like 3 stories tall, each story is only like 5 cubits, and the main building would have been, let's say, 30 cubits. So it would have been like halfway up the building. So the building has kind of got this like layered cake sort of structure to it, look to it. Which I wonder I don't know if church's design is based on that or just the necessity of, if you want to build tall, you have to build in that style.
I think much of cathedral design, it has to do with just making them really tall so that the sounds sound like they're coming from heaven above. And you're tricked into thinking that a God is speaking to you in this place.
Yeah, I mean,
The
it's also a
acoustic
statement
elements are
building.
wonderful for music.
That too.
That makes sense.
But
I
it
know
does
people who have
create a
been
natural
converted by
reverb.
Bach.
Yeah.
So
It's not like I've been to in London. There is a Mithraeum like ruin under the ground, which they like excavated and stuff. And so you can go inside, and they have like this sort of experience where the lights go off, and there's mist and some lighting and sounds. So you can kind of feel like you're in a ancient Roman cult building, and they're like praying in this dark temple with no windows and stuff. Very different feeling from a church, but also similar in a lot of ways.
Do we know the bottom line on archaeology about Solomon's temple? Is there evidence?
I think there is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like-
I think not Solomon, but there was a
I mean, the
temple.
Wailing Wall is.
There was a temple.
No, that's the second temple though.
Yeah, exactly. The second.
We don't have any
temple.
archaeology, I think, for the first temple, but I think it's mentioned or something like that.
It's tough to be allowed to dig there though, because there's a lot of.
That's true as well.
So allegedly, it's
Second
all
temple
underneath
is
the dome of
It's
the
around
rock.
the dome of the rock. Yeah. So
And the Wailing Wall.
you
So
can.
everybody's very.
But but the assumption is that a first temple did exist.
Yeah, we don't have archaeology of the actual building or anything, but I think there's mention of like, it was sacked and the not the Romans was already second temple, but and the Wailing Wall is from Herod. Herod built he expanded the courtyard, like the Temple Mount area, like it was more hilly, and he made it a bit more flat by putting in walls and filling in the space behind the walls with dirt to make the area bigger. And so the Wailing Wall is one of those old what they called it's a wall that holds back the dirt, kind of. It's not the other side of the wall is higher up. Yeah, containing wall. Yeah. Retaining wall.
Yeah.
And also the court of the Gentiles, right? That was an innovation, was it not? Introduced by Herod.
Maybe
The outermost court where the Gentiles would be permitted.
Yeah.
That would have just been the Temple Mount area as a whole, and then like the actual the temple area, like what we're describing now, like Solomon's temple, it doesn't really mention like another annex like courtyard. It's just, this is the temple, and it's kind of like the tabernacle, right? It's just the temple building and then a courtyard. That courtyard would have been just for priests and people who are bringing sacrifices. But in the second temple, there is a whole other like structure with outbuildings and stuff that was known as the women's courtyard, because it had a like a raised gallery where women would stand during like major festivals and stuff. But that was kind of like the Jewish courtyard, and then everything outside of all of that was, you could say, the courtyard of the Gentiles. And we've found, like, archaeology have found like a sign that I think is like Greek, Latin, and something else, Persian maybe, that says beyond this point do not cross, sort of thing. Yeah.
Under penalty of death.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a penalty for everything. Picking up sticks, mixing fabrics.
In fact, there's a narrative of Paul bringing in a Gentile past that point, and that being maybe one of the reasons why Paul was persecuted or convicted.
He was?
Well, that was the accusation, and then he's like, no, it's all.
But that would have been after the time of Herod, and I doubt it would have had to have been like a local bylaw or something that the Romans would have had to care about to enforce, and if they didn't, they wouldn't have done anything about it.
Well, they wouldn't have,
So,
but the
yeah.
Jews would have. Yeah.
Yeah,
been
yeah.
upset.
Herod was pre-Jesus, so all that was there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'll start on verse 1. 480th year. Several commentators questioned the given years. Cogan writes that the number 480 is based on an artificial calculation of 12 generations of 40 years. DeVries notes that 480 equals 4 times 12 times 10, with each figure having symbolic value for DH. Sweeney notes that, quote, some contend that 480 represents an attempt to periodize history. I wrote it with two O's. Is an attempt to periodize history based on the rough correspondence to the period from the conclusion of Solomon's reign, 920 BCE, to the year when Cyrus of Persia authorized construction of the Second Temple in 539 BCE, end quote. He writes, however, that this chronology is not secure. Septuagint has 440. Cogan suggested that Septuagint counts only 11 generations of priests between Aaron and Zadok. On the month of Ziv, most traditional commentators identify this month with the month of Iyar, since it is the second month, quote-unquote. And according to Talmud Rosh Hashanah 11a, quote, there is radiance, Ziv, for the trees, end quote. Likewise, Targum reads, the month of Ziv, the blossoms. Ibn Kaspi, however, identified the month Ziv with Sivan, the third month. Interestingly enough. Modern commentators note that Ziv is the Canaanite name for the second month. Fritz writes that the use of the name Ziv shows that the dating is that of DH. Cogan writes that the month's name was determined by the Phoenician calendar. He notes Casuto's opinion that the concentration of the names here, including Bur in verses 37 and 38, suggests that the building report stems from an old Israelite record of the project, influenced by the contacts with the Phoenicians responsible for the construction. On verse 2, Fritz comments, the measurements in verses 2 and 3 are the outside measurements, but in verses 16 through 29, we find similar figures for the inside. According to this, the house, including the vestibule, was 70 cubits long, 70 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The standard measurement of a cubit changed during the time of the kings, from the old 44.5 centimeters to the royal measurement of 51.8 centimeters. Thus, the building as such had either a size of 31.50 meters times 890 meters times 13.35 meters, or 36.26 meters times 1036 meters times 1554 meters. The graphic
I apologize for interrupting, Tomer. I just want to say something because there's nonsense going on in the chat. Guys, stop interacting with God's servant. He is not acting in good faith. He's trying to make people cook up scenarios to justify abortion. He's been given them. He's ignoring it. It doesn't matter. No one has the right to use my body without my consent.
Yes, he is
Stop.
a quite obviously deeply dishonest, deliberate troll.
Yes,
and a complete
he's
waste
not
of time.
Honest at all.
I have to wonder sometimes whether people really are that stupid or if they're lying, and I've determined that when they're defenders of the faith, it is always both.
You know,
well, they like to control.
If you want a better place to talk about that stuff, I'm pretty sure God's servant is in the Discord.
Oh,
so
no,
go kick his ass there.
Okay.
Yes, they
So
offer you can
you guys go ahead and have a chat in there.
No.
Now we're talking about more important stuff like the Temple of Solomon, which definitely existed,
and was so grand and special, so special.
Yeah. Okay. Where was I? The graphic reconstruction leads to a long house with a vestibule with the distorted proportions of 7 to 2 to 3. The length of the building is not in proportion to its width, and its height in particular is far too great. The missing balance of height, length, and width, and the even figures lead to the assumption that the measurements are not the real ones, but simply an estimate by the author.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take into account the width of the walls, which is always my pet peeve with like all of the descriptions in the Bible when it talks about the Solomon's temple, the second temple, the Ezekiel's vision of the third temple. It gives all of these measurements, but it doesn't say how thick the walls are. So there's no way to actually make like a.
It seems like in this statement the walls are sort of a varying thickness because they're
Yeah. That it mentions that, but it doesn't actually say like, oh, here is the building is this wide, and then this room is this and this, which is the total of the width of the building. So like, is there walls outside of this width, or is it included inside the total? Yeah,
I don't know. And admittedly, I've only heard of city walls that were big enough for 2 chariots to ride around, but those are defensive, so a little different.
But you have to build wide if you want to build tall, that's for sure. So
yeah, no, but not necessarily 2 chariots width.
I mean,
but don't worry, Solomon was a very wise king, so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's someone I've seen someone here who's tried to figure it out, and like they've put the 20 cubits as the width of the building plus the walls, which makes the Holy of Holies less than 20 cubits. Is it 10 by 10? I guess. Yeah. So maybe I got that mixed up. It's 10 by 10 by 10, not 20 by 20 by 20. But whatever.
It's a cube.
Okay, on 7, Sweeney writes that the prohibition on iron tools may reflect an ideal remote past, since the introduction of iron in the ancient Near East only took place about the time of the formation of Israel at the beginning of the Iron Age, circa 1200 BCE. DeVries writes that this verse is not Deuteronomistic, but clearly does not belong to the original document. Cogan notes that this procedure echoes the requirement that Israelite altars were to be built of natural, unworked stones, as we see in Exodus 20:25. This is how the altar on Mount Ebal was made, as we see in Joshua 8:31 and Deuteronomy 27:5. Now,
the thing about not having iron, because of course if you use iron tools you'll leave little bits of iron and iron shavings everywhere, and I just love that in witchcraft salt and iron are used to repel evil, and God seems to be allergic to iron, so
yeah, the thing is that it probably does stem from this so if you notice, we talked about this when we were back in Deuteronomy and Leviticus and stuff like that. Like a lot of the laws are strictly supposed to be like ways to put the Israelites in like a different category than like the other groups of the time. So like it would have been a way, like not using iron would have been a way to differentiate them from other people of the time. So like this, I think Christine Hayes talks about it in her book, "What's Divine About Divine Law," and it's the fact that when the Israelites were writing these things, when they were coming up with these prescriptions, they were thinking, well, like here's all the stuff that these cultures around us do or use, all the stuff that they practice, so we shouldn't do it. Or we should do something else that's like the exact opposite.
Oh my God, they were the first hipsters. We can't do, everybody's doing that. Ew. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's the old marketing principle, differentiate or die. That's...
We're special. We would never do that. We're not like other Canaanites. Oh my God.
I do wonder though, the woodworking labor involved here of what I would imagine planing timber and squaring stuff out would have required some iron tools, but I don't know, maybe that's why they outsourced as well, because we can just sort of have a way around the law that we can't do or utilize these tools or whatnot.
I think it only applies to stones, right?
I mean, it doesn't actually say what type of stone they use, right? And like, for example, one of the main ways that Egyptians would cut their massive stones wasn't with iron tools and stuff, they would use something what's harder than iron. Well, not something like that. I mean, if let's say if you want to cut limestone, you only need something that's a bit harder than that, and quartz is harder than limestone. So you can just use sand and rope, and you can cut a big old limestone rock by like kind of grinding it down with the sand and a rope. It's quite cool.
Yeah.
Back in my day, we used rocks and bronze, and we liked it.
But it could be that I would imagine, the hill country of Judah, like the rocks, there wouldn't have necessarily been soft limestone or even what's the other one?
No, there could be some sharp enough for tools, but yeah.
Now, some rabbinic sources claim that in order to carve the stones, a special creature, usually identified as a worm, called Shamir, which can cut stones, was used. According to Talmud Gittin 68a, Moses used this worm to cut the stones of the ephod. The tractate tells of Solomon trying to find the Shamir. Quote, "Where is it found?" They said to him, "Bring a male demon and a female demon and torment them together. It is possible that they know where, and due to the suffering, they will reveal the place to you." Solomon brought a male demon and a female demon and tormented them together, and they said, "We do not know where to find the Shamir. Perhaps Ashmedai, king of the demons, knows." End quote. The story
that's
goes...
Asmodeus.
Asmodeus, yeah, but the story goes on to describe how Ashmedai was found, and when Solomon confronts him, quote, "Solomon said to him, 'I need nothing from you. I want to build the temple, and I need the Shamir for this.' Ashmedai said to him, 'The Shamir was not given to me, but it was given to the angelic minister of the sea, and he gives it only to the wild rooster, whom he trusts by the force of his oath to return it." End quote. After Solomon's servant takes the Shamir from the rooster, it strangled itself over the fact that it had not kept its oath.
How do How do people talk like this to each other without
and take
giggling?
themselves seriously?
Is the rooster also like giant? Is this also
I
like a
think
giant
so.
rooster?
I think so.
Its
This is like
feet are in the water and its
fables.
head is in the clouds or something.
Fucked up.
I think so.
And
Also,
the
what is it
sea
with the
comes up to its.
What is it with the Middle Eastern magic worms too? They have that thing in Arabic thought about magic worms that make you crave impure sex.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the ones that make you gay or too horny. It's depending on your source. There's still somebody promoting that today. It's also in Muslim literature from like way back in the day. Tales of Scheherazade. It's weird.
I'm not gay. I just have butt worms.
Well, you have a magical
no.
worm that craves the essence of men.
Yeah. Just drink this vinegar and you'll be fine.
They should use vinegar. I read The 1,000 Nights and One Night. It's the original, a translation, obviously, and there's some weird shit in there. Oh my god.
Well, I have another thing. Talmud Sotah 48b reads, "The sages taught this Shamir, its size is that of a barley corn, and it was created in the 6 days of creation, and nothing hard can withstand it, in what it is kept, so that it will not break everything in the vicinity. They wrap it in tufts, in Hebrew or in Aramaic, sephogin, of wool, and place it in a leaden vessel, itene, full of barley bran, which is soft and will not be broken by the Shamir."
Yeah. So this is where people get the idea that the Shamir was radioactive.
Yeah.
Oh,
because it's kept in a lead box.
Yes.
Yeah, that's obviously something they would have known at the time.
There are natural reactors, but
it was
I doubt there would be a worm.
Imagine they just take out this little radioactive rock and put it on things and go away and come back and hit it and it breaks. Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's a fun story. I'm sure that I'm sure there were other stories that we would that we were told about the Shamir. I can't remember. Was there maybe like a thing with like you would like lay either you would draw a line or lay a string on the rock, and then the Shamir would follow it, something like that.
I don't know.
I mean, I've heard of actual stone cutting methods like that, where you blast through with water, or you put a fault and then cut through in some way and smack it. And...
Maybe there are some like bacteria or something that you could like put on a rock and cause it to split over time.
That would take a long ass time. In 3 generations, hit this rock and it'll be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and finally 11 through 13, these verses interrupt the building account. Cogan notes that many commentators take these verses as relatively late, written during the editing of the book. Moreover, these verses are missing from the Septuagint, contain priestly formulas such as, if you follow my laws and observe my rules, we see in Leviticus 26:3, and I will abide among the children of Israel, as we see in Exodus 25:8, 39:45, and Numbers 5:3, and Deuteronomistic formulas, such as, keep all my commandments, and I will fulfill for you the promise. Fritz takes the verses to be entirely Deuteronomistic, noting that the connection between obedience and the course of life is a characteristic feature of Deuteronomistic theology. Sweeney, however, writes that when read in relation to the present context, the verses presume, quote, that Solomon observes Yahweh's commands, and that Yahweh will uphold the promise for security to the house of David and the city of Jerusalem. The larger DH literature context points to more ominous understandings, end quote. Yeah, that's it for my part.
More or less, it's like, this is why we don't have the temple, because we didn't follow the rules. Yeah.
There are so many stories like that where everyone follows all these ridiculous nitpicky rules, but then one person fucks up some tiny little insignificant detail, and then they all have to die because God is just. And words have no meaning, apparently.
Yeah. All right, I got a couple of comments. Tammy B offers $5 Australian and says, any trips to Australia soon, Aaron? I would love to go to Australia again, but that was a big deal both times. And it's I don't have hardly any international travel planned at the moment. Sorry to say. But if there's a group in Australia that wants to have me down there, let's negotiate how to do that. All right. And then Tammy B offers another $5 Australian and says, Aaron, I'm trying to memorize almost word for word your entire systematic classification of life series to lecture at various events.
Good luck.
And, yes, and thank you very much for the compliment. All right, so we ready to pick up at 14?
Yes.
Okay. So, Solomon built the house and finished it. He lined the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar from the floor to the house up to the rafters of the ceiling. He covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress, which I guess are not wood somehow. He built 20 cubits of the rear of the house with boards of cedar from the floor to the rafters, and he built this within as an inner sanctuary, as the most holy place. Oh. The house, that is the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long. The cedar within the house had carvings of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. The inner sanctuary he prepared with the innermost part of the house, prepared in the innermost part of the house, to set there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. The interior of the inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. It was a cubic cubit. He overlaid it with pure gold, including the toilet. And you can see where this is going. He also overlaid the altar with cedar. Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. Then he drew chains of gold across in front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. Next, he overlaid the whole house with gold in order that the whole house might be perfect. Even the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. And it was so beautiful, like no one's ever seen.
It was the most gold, the perfect gold, the purest gold.
In the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. 5 cubits was the length of one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the length of the other wing of the cherub, because anything else would have looked weird. It was 10 cubits from the tip of one wing to the tip of the other, because 5 plus 5, even then they knew, that's 10. Even after you tell them the sequel. The other cherub also measured 10 cubits. Both cherubim had the same measure of the same form. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was that of the other cherub. Because we just said that, but we like to repeat ourselves when it's really not important at all, and we don't like to get into any of the details that really matter. He put the cherubim on the innermost part of the house. The wings of the cherubim were spread out so that the wing of one was touching the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. Their other wings touched the center of the house. We're touching wing to wing. Toward the center of the house, we're touching wing to wing. He also overlaid the cherubim with gold. Cover wooden things we're going to cover with gold. He carved the walls of the house all around about with carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers in the inner and outer rooms. The floor of the house he overlaid with, guess what, kids? Gold! In the inner and outer rooms.
Oh, damn it, I was going to say silver.
I was going to say titanium.
Yeah, be careful if you spill anything. It gets really
labradite
in there. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood. The lintel and the doorposts were 5-sided. He covered the 2 doors of olive wood with carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He overlaid them with gold, because we cast gold on top of wooden things and spread gold on the cherubim and the palm trees.
It's like
everything's gold plated, not solid gold, just gold plated, everything's. So he also made for the entrance to the nave doorposts of olive wood, 4-sided each, and 2 doors of cypress wood. The 2 leaves of one door were folding, and the 2 leaves of the other door were folding. And he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, the same shit on everything, overlaying them all with gold, evenly applied upon the carved work.
No wonder Hezekiah was able to.
He built the inner court with 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 course of cedar beams. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid, after everything else was built?
Yeah, basically. Everything else was made, and then he did the finishing
In the beginning
touches.
of the chapter, it says, in the 4th year, in the month of Ziv, he started.
Okay. In the month
The
of
foundation
Ziv.
was built last.
I think this is now, that's just like everything's happened, and now it's going like the timeline.
Okay. In the 11th year, in the month of Bull, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its parts, and according to its specifications. He was 7 years in building it.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this shares themes with the building of the tabernacle, and the significance of the cherubim should not be overstated. Those pop up. Those pop up a lot, especially for the ark itself. But it is quite interesting how much. I mean, I think this was, like, textually speaking, a prerequisite, a predecessor for the text we get in the Torah for it.
Oh.
Well, and the Hezekiah later buys his life from refusing to pay pay off whatever king owned him at that time by stripping the gold from the doors of the temple. So that this at least gives the impression that there was a great deal of gold to be stripped from the temple. But yeah, it's.
And if he's covering everything with gold, I mean, didn't we get a description of the ark saying that it was overlaid with gold, or at least part of it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So
was, it was
the ark
overlaid
is
with
made
gold.
up of 3 boxes: a gold box, a wooden box, and a gold box, and they're just kind of like
Is anybody else
like a
envisioning the
matryoshka
interior of
doll where
Trump
they're
Tower?
like inside each other.
Yeah, but like it, I don't know.
Okay, but either way,
I think Trump is a little grosser.
Yes. I would say that that's important for when we get to the destruction of the temple. Just keeping in mind that not only is everything covered with gold, but the ark is included in that.
I feel like it's important to note they talk about the glory of God being in the inner sanctuary. If you cover everything in gold, everything's going to be a bit glowy. Look, it's magic.
Anton Gomez says it's basically El Dorado. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, we haven't even gotten to like the dedication, which is even crazier.
Yes.
And then Matt White says, Aaron, that sounds like more gold than has ever been mined. Ever.
Mansa Musa had that much gold, and he was a real king who existed, and a black man. He managed to completely destroy economies for a dozen years in fits of generosity. But he was a good king and built libraries and promoted education. So good for him.
And you know what? I'm not mad at him for like giving away a whole bunch of wealth. I'm not going to be mad at that.
No. It's throwing your money to people on the street if you're obscenely wealthy. I don't hate him for that.
Yeah.
Then Tammy B says another up of $5 Australian. Thank you. It says, damn it, no trips to Australia. Yeah, I know, right? I still haven't seen Ayers Rock. You know, I haven't been to Darwin. I would love to go to Darwin. That would be awesome.
Aaron, Darwin's been dead for a while.
Yeah, and she says, well, if you do, I would happily accommodate you, your family, and friends.
Oh,
thank you very kindly. All right.
Okay, so I'll start on verse 15. Fritz comments, the description of the woodwork commences with a note on the lining of the walls and the floor covering. We do not know how well stone walls could be covered by wooden paneling. This lining of the wall is understandable only if one takes the ornamentation of verse 29 into account. The paneling corresponds to the orthostats on the lower parts of the wall in Assyrian palaces that were decorated with reliefs. It has to remain open whether the author is describing the actual state. Also, the covering of the floor with wood is highly unusual, given both the value of the material and its durability. Next to floors made from fortified clay, stone is fairly common. Wooden floors have not yet been excavated. It can no longer be determined why cypress boards were used for the floor. Maybe they were easier to cut than the fairly hard wood of the cedar.
I mean, if the idea was to cover everything in gold, then it could just be that they used wood because you can stick gold to wood more easily than you can to stone.
Well, and also it is easier to carve, especially if you're doing detailed carvings, to carve a softer wood than it is to carve stone. If you like for the ornamental stuff, you know, there's only, not to say that, you know, obviously you have the great masters and Michelangelo and but that shit takes a while, and they were clearly going for maximum glitz and glam.
Okay, on 16, an inner sanctuary, the most holy place. Sweeney comments, the designation devir is derived from the root dalet bet resh, to speak, which suggests a linguistic origin in relation to oracle divination. The root may also mean to lead and guide, which would presuppose the leadership role of Yahweh and the priests. Because the devir is the location of the ark, the expression Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, appears frequently as an alternate designation. The remaining 40 cubits of the temple interior form the Heichal. Hebrew Heichal, a term ultimately derived from Sumerian Igal, which means great house or palace. The Devir and Heichal together emphasize the analogy of the throne room and the great hall of a royal palace. On
Yeah, I
verse
would
20,
say that's interesting that I just have a quick point. It is interesting that Solomon is supposed to be this like mythical king who has like the biggest kingdom and strength and stuff, and then it's a bit like this description of the temple is a bit a lot of wood covered in gold leaf. The size, it's pretty much just like 3 rooms and a courtyard. Like compared to the second temple and Herod's temple, it's actually not that grand. And if it was supposed to be built by the greatest king of all time, it seems a bit weird that like
maybe that's why they're leading on the
solid-
whole. It was totally covered in gold to make it like more precious, even if it wasn't
like the second
bigger.
temple had like solid doors and stuff that were themselves carved by like craftsmen in Egypt and stuff like that. It's like it's interesting that over here it's just wooden carvings with gold plating. And I think it talks about marble in the second temple as well. It seems a lot more expensive. But it's
It also seems that it would be very hot in there with all that timber and gold. Like
They had
couple of
ventilation.
windows.
Don't worry about it.
candelabra.
I was sort of thinking at first it was like a sauna with the thick stone walls and then all the wood paneling, but then they covered everything in gold.
It does mention that there's windows though, although we'll get to that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. On 20, Cogan comments, the debir was cube-shaped. Each side was 20 cubits long. While the length of the debir was similar to the width of the temple, it was short by 10 cubits from the temple's height. An explanation for this difference was not given, and many interpretations were given. 1. The debir was raised above the floor of the hall, accessible by a short flight of stairs. In this regard, note is sometimes taken of the raised podium or pedestal in non-Israelite sanctuaries, upon which the cult object was set, according to DeVries. However, scripture does not mention stairs in front of the debir. And 2, the temple's roof was shorter by 10 cubits above the debir, much like slanted roofs in Egyptian temples, according to Vincent. This too has no evidence in scripture. 3. The space above the debir to the ceiling of the hall had no use, according to Knox. For now, the matter is not decided.
Yeah, that's why I said I like the idea that the space is like has like the machinations and the chains and whatnot going on to move the cherubs around and who knows what.
Yeah. Deus ex machina. Religion is theater. And if we just treated it like theater, it would be fine. We could have a good time. They could put on a good show. You could have the razzmatazz and the gold and the incense and the chants, and then go home and listen.
Maybe they had like an ancient steam engine in there to make the smoke and stuff and noise.
Pillar
and
fire.
Huh?
Oh yeah.
Well,
that makes sense.
get enough incense going and maybe little vortex.
Yeah. Okay, on 21 and 22.
Oh, actually,
Fritz
I
comments.
do.
Oh, sorry.
This might be a second temple thing, but I do remember learning about like in order to clean the inside of the rooms and stuff, they had like a box with like a 3-sided box with one side open, kind of like an elevator or lift, and they would like drop them through a hole in the ceiling, and so the workers could only see the wall bit that they were working on to like do the carvings or refix something, cleaning it. And maybe that's what the space above is, so they can get above the room to get lowered into it.
Okay.
So you're gonna rig me up on lines and I'll come down. Be the angel
like in a
descending from
box.
on high. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, 21 and 22. Fritz comments, the remark on the gold overlay is an addition that in turn resulted in the further comments in verses 21 and 22. According to this, the whole interior was overlaid with gold. The chains as a further decorative element cannot be explained. The lining of the interior with gold moves beyond any decoration known and wants to stress the special status of the Solomonic temple, which exceeds any other cultic building in the milieu. The decoration does not reflect reality, but expresses the wish to glorify the Temple of Jerusalem. On verse 23, the cherubim. The cherubim are described as, quote, composite mythical creatures with wings, end quote, according to DeVries. Cogan notes that the cherubim served in the divine retinue. For example, Yahweh moved about on a cherub in 2 Samuel 22:11 and Ezekiel 10 verses 18 and 19, and was depicted seated on a cherub throne, as seen in 2 Kings 19:15 and Psalms 82. Images of different cherubim are known from ancient Near Eastern art, and are sometimes compared with the Akkadian kuribu.
Isn't it cherub and cherubim?
No, in Hebrew it's keruv.
Oh, in
Yeah.
Hebrew. Okay.
Yeah. The ch cherub in Hebrew it comes from a k sound, and
Okay.
as in a lot of places, B is actually of a V sound.
Yeah.
Like Abraham.
Sweeney writes that the cherubim represent the manifestation of the divine on earth as guardians of sacred sites, kings, cities, etc. They symbolize the roles of Yahweh as king and creator, and the temple as the representative of the Garden of Eden. On 29 and 30, Fritz comments, according to verse 29, the paneled inside walls were decorated with carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and garlands. Palm trees occur quite frequently in ancient Near Eastern art, since they represent the tree of life. Garlands are bands of ornaments or floral patterns that could be extended at will. All motifs are well known from ivory carvings of the royal period. Further details are not mentioned. The additional remark on the golden overlay is missing, since this fact had already been stressed for the temple as a whole in verses 21 and 22. Verse 30 mentions that the floor too was overlaid with gold, a rather senseless addition. On verses 33 through 35, Sweeney comments, verses 33 through 35 describe the main doors of the temple. The four-sided doorposts are constructed of olive wood, whereas the doors themselves are constructed of cypress, which provides even greater strength. The tselalim, ribs, are the support beams placed on jambs or pivots, in Hebrew glilim, literally rollers, that allow them to open. Such door jambs are well known from archaeological contexts, where they appear as hollowed stones or a larger stone mantle into which the main beams of a heavy wooden door are inserted. Engraved images of blossoming flowers, cherubim, and palm trees overlaid in gold symbolize Eden. The concluding phrase, Meyushar al ha-mechukah, directly on the engraving, indicates that the gold leaf was applied to the engravings and not to the entire surface of the door. Mechukeh.
That would honestly probably look better. I just wasn't expecting restraint.
And finally, on 38, the month of Bul. Traditional commentators take Bul to be Mar Cheshvan, at least the Hebrew month. As Rashi explains, quote, when the grass in the field decays, Bala, and cattle is given fodder, Bolelin, from what is stored, from the expression, and he gave fodder, Vayevol, to the donkeys, in Judges 19:21, end quote. Likewise, Targum reads, the month of the finishing of ripening. As is the case with Ziv, modern commentators take Bul to be a Canaanite name, or Phoenician, according to Cogan, for the eighth month.
Yeah, so the Jewish people nowadays use month names that are based on the Babylonian calendar, and Nisan is the first month in that calendar, and so normally in the Bible when it says first month, blah blah blah, it's normally said that this is the month of this is the first month is Nisan. But for example, the Jewish New Year is not in spring; it's in autumn. So there's like it seems to have been a time where there might have been multiple different sort of calendars working at the same time, where you might have had like the king's year was always counted from Nisan, but the year of the seasons and stuff and the yearly cycle would start in Tishrei, whatever, the autumn beginning. And there's also like the new year of trees, and there's another one I can't remember what it's called, but like it probably reflects some like change of like Canaanite structure, which the Bible mentions sometimes the names and then it's also and then it just gives you the number, and then only later do we get, I think like Esther, we get like, you know, the more modern Persian Babylonian names, like Adar, right? That's the when Purim happens. So that's a Babylonian name.
So is the significance of using a Canaanite calendar versus a Babylonian calendar, is that mostly because it's just signaling that, hey, this is pre-exilic for sure? Or what do we make of the use of the Canaanite calendar?
It seems more like that
Israelites.
this text would have used Bull, Ziv, these older names, and then it seems that later, to me it seems at least a later editor has come in and said, this is the 8th month, this is the so that they know which is which or something like that. But although I mean, like in Genesis, it doesn't have any names, only numbers, so it's it's confusing, to say the least.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, what I think that this is the usage of Bull and Ziv reflects something older, and the numbering system is probably like intermediate, and then the Persian or Babylonian system comes later.
Yeah. So the Christians are going quite wild in this yeah, especially Bede, who has a lot of things to say, but and just for brevity's sake, I'm not including all of them. If you want, again,
I hope not. We haven't done anything that evil.
Basically, a lot of this represents all sorts of stuff about Jesus and stuff. But I still have, I mean, there are some Christians, at least sensible, as if that means anything. So Bede wrote that the numbers in the chronology of the construction of the temple symbolize evangelical perfection and the grace of the Holy Spirit. Ishodad said that the measures of the house of God are symbolic figures of the virtues of the Christian church. The porch represents the people belonging to the Holy Church who precede the time of our Lord's incarnation. The windows of the temple are the holy teachers to whom, when in divine ecstasy, it is granted to see the hidden mysteries of heaven. And the side chambers or porticos were built to support the house. That's the only thing that makes... never change. Bede again said that the 3 floors denote the levels of the faithful, namely married people, those who practice continence, and virgins.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, that's like people who should be allowed to vote, but then you said virgins, so like, that's not.
Oh God.
Origin.
Sexuality is not an interest of God here.
No, well, no, but it is an interest of Christians, because remember, Christianity exists primarily to forbid sex, either to control you or ideally to just make it titillating, because apparently someone couldn't get it up unless it was forbidden.
Yeah. Origen and Ambrose said that hammers, axes, and tools of iron symbolize the devil and his instruments.
Yeah.
Therefore,
Okay,
God cannot beat the devil.
Well, listen to the rationale. He says, Christ knocks with his hand that you may open, whereas the adversary cuts the door down with axes. And therefore, it is written that hammer and axe should not enter into the house of God.
I don't know. Quick question. For those who have received threats of violence, including, the breaking down of doors and the threatening of one's life, who among us has received them from the pagans and the non-believers? And who among us has received them from the faithful?
Oh yeah, I received plenty from very angry Christians. I would have to find it, but there was this one specific guy who was so mad that we were, doing any kind of Bible study, that he was absolutely threatening physical violence, about like curb stomping us and how we're like soy boys or some bullshit like that. Like this guy was a stereotype. It was so funny.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Jesus who said, I've come to bring not peace, but a sword?
Of course, yeah, which is why this guy had a sword at his keyboard.
Thankfully, I live in Israel and don't need to deal with this crap. So. And,
you subjugate the Christians and don't let them proselytize, and how dare you?
They have ads everywhere.
Are you kidding? Yeah, even I've seen ads for the Jewish, the missionary Jew thing.
Yeah,
it's creepy as fuck.
I mean, nobody buys it, but just yeah.
No, I think there is.
Okay.
I think there is like some certain. I think there are certain restrictions on missionaries, specifically targeting.
Like, targeting minorities.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ephraim wrote that the engravings on the walls represent either a type of the saints praying in the temple of God, and beat adds, or the manifold functions of the virtues. And there is a whole assload of things Beat's saying that I'm not going to get into because it's too much.
You know what? This is something that I've thought so many times, and Mark can back me up on this. So many of these commentaries just remind me of sermons. Very often, especially because ministers have to provide sermons like for years and years and years and years. They would take a scripture, either one that they were studying personally or something in a liturgy, and they would just think about it and use it to draw analogies and use it to, and there was never the sense that this is the true meaning of the scripture. It's like, this is what the Holy Spirit told me in the scripture. I used it as, a focal point for my meditation. The blah, 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 the Bible is alive and God's Spirit inhabits it and blah, 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 blah. But you would just use the scripture as an illustration for your thoughts, basically, or to inspire thoughts, and then back and forth. But we never confused that with scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
Are these people actually saying that this is not just, that it inspired them to think of the virtues, but that this is the actual meaning of the frickin' text? Tomer?
Yeah.
Oh?
I'm asking.
Well, sorry, I was blanking out.
How dare you? I'm asking if, these people are saying that this is the actual meaning of the text, not the meaning that it inspired them to meditate on or consider, but the actual meaning.
I mean, it seems like it. I didn't read the quotations, but how they describe it seems like yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not reading Christ into it, you're not digging deep enough, because somehow all of it has to point towards Christ. And that's one of the main critiques of mine towards modern day interpreters, is that they try to make everything, including New Testament authors, they try to make everything about how it fits their theology, but that's not necessarily what the text is saying or teaching or meaning. They blur the line between a midrash and this is what it is. This is the meaning of the text.
Right. Like a story can inspire you to think on things, and that's great. That's cool. But it's so prescriptive.
Mm-hmm. Furthausen offers $5 and says, "Thank you for the show."
Yeah. I also like digging deep into biblical literature.
Yeah, how do they explain the cherubim?
Oh.
Who?
Everyone. It's weird, right? I mean, carved images, things before God and idols.
They did have. Well, this. So I've talked about it before in the show, but the idea of having, no gods before me kind of thing, that would have been like a. I think that there are plenty of hints in the text about how the ark was a statue of Yahweh. So literally meant no gods before me, no gods in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Don't block the view. He wants to seal
the cherubim
golden calyxes.
The cherubim sort of give me the impression of an honor guard standing at either side, the way that a king would, always be flanked by, noble soldiers and full regalia and all that nonsense.
Yeah. Either way, they're not gods, right?
No,
I think
but
they're very
they are
similar to like
apparently...
the what they call the lalitu. The ones that are like bull.
Lamasu.
Lamasu, yeah.
It's
They're very
possible that
similar to
this is
that.
considered an exception to the make no,
Yeah.
graven images, because it's specifically prescripted by God in the text, to make this cherubim to symbolize the glory of my presence, to accompany, to,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're part of the. The cherubim, even you could go along with like Ophanim and like the other angels that are listed, the other divine beings that are listed. Like those would have just been part of his divine council, along with other gods early on.
But like the prescription against making images and stuff says of any divine being and even planet. I don't know if that might be counted as one. All right, yeah. Oh, I just want to mention like one of my favorite comments by Rashi is on this chapter, because on verse 20 it mentions the that mentions the altar. So he says, the interior, you're talking about like the sanctum, right? The shrine or whatever. It's 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide. And then at the end of the sentence, it says, really overlaid the cedar altar, or the altar with cedar. And like Rashi's like, I am perplexed. Like, why are they doing this? Like, I have no idea what's going on in this verse. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, he's saying this must be the golden altar of incense, but I am perplexed. Why was Moses's golden altar hidden, like covered in wood or whatever? That's what seemed to be implied by this verse. Like, he's just like, oh, I don't know what's going on here either. So
I thought they were just going with like wood paneling, very like 70s, 80s aesthetic.
Yeah. I mean, the JPS translates it as he overlaid he similarly overlaid the cedar altar, as opposed to he overlaid the altar with cedar. But it seems to be like, it's still a bit of a weird thing to say. Like, we're talking about the inner sanctum, not the outer one where this incense altar is supposed to be, although none of the vessels are mentioned in this chapter. And besides the altar, the ark, not the altar, the ark, and this one. But it's like, it seems a bit weird to put it in that verse. It doesn't seem to match.
Maybe it's a bit of awkward stitching together. I mean, even the parts of this that are relatively whole, we all know have gone through.
There is a bit of repetition as well going on. It seems to mention like covering the walls and at least 3-4 times. I don't know. It's whatever.
I mean, I think it all speaks to the superstition that might have been behind all this. Like, this is a building that is intended to house the presence of the holy God, and so therefore protected from any and all impurities, sin, and so all these things, materials, design, have to be carefully thought out so that we can make this possible. And I think including the presence of the cherubim themselves is sort of implying that something really holy, or God's presence is meant to be confined within that area.
Mm-hmm. I think we should.
Did we
move on
mention
to the
the
next chapter.
windows as well?
Yes.
One idea is like, I remember being taught as a kid, like, the temple had windows that were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside, because rather than like every other building, which would be the other way around, so that more sun would come in, the light from inside the temple was so great that it was like shining out of the building, so it would be
because of the glory of the Most High.
Oh, I think it's supposed to be the candelabra or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah, but it could be either that it's saying. It's not, the language isn't that clear.
I think we should move on to the next chapter.
Oh, very well. Who's going to read?
I suggest Mark.
Sure.
Let's get it.
All right, chapter 7.
Yes, read up through 26.
Okie doke. Solomon took 13 years to build his palace. He named it the Palace of Lebanon Forest. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It had 4 rows of cedar pillars and cedar beams above the pillars. The
I
roof
wonder how they're
above-
figuring out that these lengths are in feet.
It's not really feet; it's arms.
It's cubits, which is like
Yeah, in
quite a
Hebrew
bit
it's
longer than
amma.
a foot.
Yeah,
It's quite a bit longer than a foot.
yeah, but amma literally means like the arm.
It depends on the length of your
Yeah.
forearm, to be honest.
Yeah.
The roof above the beams, supported by the pillars, was also made of cedar. There were 45 beams, 15 per row. There were 3 rows of windows arranged in sets of 3. All of the entrances were rectangular in shape, and they were arranged in sets of 3. He made a colonnade 75 feet long and 45 feet wide. There was a porch in front of this, and pillars and a roof in front of the porch. He also made a throne room called the Hall of Judgment, where he made judicial decisions. It was paneled with cedar from the floor to the rafters. The palace where he lived was constructed in a similar way. He also constructed a palace like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. All of these were built with the best stones, chiseled to the right size and cut with a saw on all sides, from the foundation to the edge of the roof and from the outside to the great courtyard. The foundation was made of large, valuable stones, measuring either 15 feet or 12 feet. Above the foundation, the best stones, chiseled to the right size, were used along with cedar. Around the great courtyard were 3 rows of chiseled stones and 1 row of cedar beams, like the inner courtyard of the Lord's temple and the hall of the palace. King Solomon sent for Hiram of Tyre. He was the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a craftsman in bronze from Tyre. He had the skill and knowledge to make all kinds of works of bronze. He reported to King Solomon and did all the work he was assigned. He fashioned 2 bronze pillars. Each pillar was 27 feet high and 18 feet in circumference. Wow. He made 2 bronze tops for the pillars. Each was 7.5 feet high. The lattice work on the tops of the pillars was adorned with ornamental wreaths and chains. The top of each pillar had 7 groupings of ornaments. When he made the pillars, there were 2 rows of pomegranate-shaped ornaments around the lattice work, covering the top of each pillar. The tops of the 2 pillars in the porch were shaped like lilies and were 6 feet high. On the top of each pillar, right above the bulge beside the lattice work, there were 200 pomegranate-shaped ornaments arranged in rows all the way around. He set up the pillars on the porch in front of the main hall. He erected 1 pillar on the right side and called it Yakin. He erected the other pillar on the left side and called it Boaz. The tops of the pillars were shaped like lilies, so the construction of the pillars was completed. He also made the large bronze basin called the Sea. It measured 15 feet from rim to rim, was circular in shape, and stood 7.5 feet high. Its circumference was 45 feet. Under the rim, all the way around, it were round ornaments arranged in settings of 15 feet long. The ornaments were in 2 rows and had been cast with the Sea. The Sea stood on top of 12 bulls. 3 faced northward, 3 westward, 3 southward, and 3 eastward. The Sea was placed on top of them, and they all faced outward. It was 4 fingers thick, and its rim was like that of a cup shaped like a lily blossom. It could hold about 12,000 gallons.
Yikes.
I like how your translation like does the what's it called, all the measurements are changed as well.
Yeah, and the use of the pomegranate shape, which is exactly the same shape as our Christmas tree ornaments are today.
Hmm.
I'm also interested in the room of judgment, where everyone looks at everyone else disapprovingly.
I thought that was just called church.
Mm.
Yeah, it's also interesting how like the palace is so much bigger and grander than the temple of the Lord as well, the house of the Lord.
And by the way, just out of blind curiosity, I went and looked it up. I cannot buy a British adder.
Oh.
Yeah, I can have cobras if I want to, but
green adder?
I can't have a British adder.
Probably because there aren't enough of them.
Yeah, apparently.
Okay, well, they're endangered, and we don't need to make them any more endangered.
Yeah.
People are getting upset. People got very upset recently because they're building a high-speed rail line in England, and they're spending about £1 billion to build a bat mitigation structure to protect endangered bats. And then people are getting all upset, like, "Oh, so much money on a bat shed." And it's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I whine about the destruction of your ecology because rich assholes want to drain all their land and kill off your native mosses and wetlands so that they can shoot more grouse for bragging rights.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to try and do something that's actually an improvement, like, something that's like, getting rid of cars and, something that's good for the environment in the long term, it's like anything that's bad about it, it's like, oh, they'll complain. But yeah, like you said, cutting down all the forests, no one complains about that.
No. Cutting down all the forests, draining the wetlands, destroying, remarkable ecology. Well, as long as it's the rich, egotistical aristocrats who don't want their fun interrupted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start on verse. Where was it? Yeah, verse 2. The palace of the forest of Lebanon. We are not told of its purpose. According to Targum, this was the royal summer house, an interpretation accepted by traditional commentators. Josephus, in Antiquities 8:133, wrote that Solomon constructed this building, quote, to provide space for a number of court cases and judicial inquiries about affairs, as well as to accommodate a mass of people assembled for trials, end quote. Likewise, Cogan writes that it could have been used as the official reception hall. Sweeney writes that it functioned as the major gathering area for public events, and its size and construction intended to impress the visitor or onlooker with the power and wealth of the Davidic king. On verse 7, the throne hall, Targum reads the portico. Sorry, okay. Targum reads the portico for establishing there the seat of the court that judges there. Sweeney comments, the hall of the throne is the royal throne room or hall of justice from which the king rules the kingdom. The text provides few details concerning its construction, except that it is overlaid with cedar from floor to floor. This causes some consternation among the versions, which eliminate it altogether, like the Septuagint, or understand it as from floor to ceiling, according to Peshitta and Vulgate. The phrase instead refers to the flooring at the base of the walls and support columns that define the structure of the building. The dimensions and orientation of the building are not provided, but it is possible that the hall of the throne is constructed to about the other end of the house of the forest of Lebanon, much like the hall of columns. One would enter the hall of the throne after passing first through the hall of columns and then the house of the forest of Lebanon. The three-part structure of the throne complex resembles that of the temple. On verse 8, the palace in which he was to live. Fritz comments, the royal residence containing the living and sleeping quarters is only mentioned, not described in detail. The building probably also had a kitchen. We do not get any information about the plan of the building, and as a comparison can only use Megiddo Palace 1723, which can be dated to the 10th century. In analogy to this building, we can assume that the Solomonic residential palace had several rooms, which were placed around one or more courtyards. The details, however, remain obscure. It is also not certain whether the royal harem was situated in this part of the palace. Harem.
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 A harem,
Yeah.
or
Harem.
some
Harem.
English, some British people pronounce it harem,
Harem.
which I think is closer to the Turkish.
Okay. On that same verse, a palace like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. This is the second note of 5 concerning Solomon's marriage to Pharaoh's daughter. Ditrani wrote that since she was more important to him than to any of his other wives, he made a palace for her. Fritz writes that we do not know if this palace resembled the Egyptian houses with their strict architectural plans, though it is possible, since we know that the model of the Amman houses was fairly widespread in pre-monarchic times.
Got a comment that Matt White says, Tomer, is this where the Bible says pi is 3 1/7?
No, just 3.
Oh yeah.
But
Just
I mean,
3.
yeah, but I'll
But
get
we
to
also
that
get-
because there is an interesting interpretation, at least from what I've read regarding like I'll get to that regarding the number. So on 9 through 12, DeVries comments, the antecedent for all these is vague unless we retranslate costly stones were used on all these, which is undoubtedly what is meant. Evidently, the Hebrews or Phoenicians had discovered how to apply a hard abrasive to their saws because a finer surface was desired than could be had with hammer and chisel. One must realize, of course, that native limestone was being used, a stone that is not particularly hard. The intent of these verses is to describe how stone was applied to the various structures. A distinction is being made between its application in the various buildings, verses 9 through 11, in contrast to its application in the walls of the great and inner courts. On 13 and 14, Hiram. This is not Hiram, king of Tyre, but a different Hiram, since according to verse 14, he was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali. Fritz writes that the correspondence in name with the king of Tyre is striking, quote-unquote, and can only be explained by assuming that Hiram, the craftsman, was a fictitious person. Cogan notes that according to 2 Chronicles 2, 6, 12, and 13, the craftsman's arrival was already discussed in the first negotiation between Solomon and the king of Tyre. He further writes, quote, Hiram's origin was worth mentioning, since he was responsible for the making of the vessels for the central worship of the kingdom. The chronicler replaced one detail in his genealogy. Hiram was, quote, the son of a Danite woman in 2 Chronicles 2:13. It seems that he wished to associate Hiram, although distantly, with one of the craftsmen who worked at establishing the tabernacle, since Bezalel was, quote, Oholiab, son of since Bezalel uses Oholiab, son of Achisamach from the tribe of Dan, in Exodus 35:34. Traditional commentators were silent with regard to the employment of a descendant from intermarriage in the craft-making of the temple's vessels, and combined the information described here with that of 2 Chronicles 2:13, describing Hiram as a descendant of the tribes of Naphtali and Dan who resided in Tyre. On verses 15 through 22, DeVries comments, these verses describe the two pillars with their capitals. Again, arcane architectural terms are used. Here, few parallels exist. Thus, we must form our conception from etymology, from the use of the relevant words elsewhere in Scripture, and from the general logic of craftsmanship. It helps a great deal that we are able to disregard the glosses in verses 18a, 19, and 22a. The dimensions make good sense as given, though the Greek translators were not always satisfied with them. A 27-foot high pillar with a diameter of about 6 feet would have been very impressive. It was very likely made in sections, for a 10-foot high capital rested upon it. On 21, Yachin and Boaz. It is not clear why these pillars were named. Ishodad wrote that Yachin indicates the humility of the priesthood, and Boaz signified the power of kingship. Kimchi wrote that they were named for good signs. He called the right column Yachin from the word Hachana, which means established, i.e. that the house shall be established forever, and the left column is called Boaz from the root Oz, from the word Oz, which means strength, and is a composite of Bo-Oz, i.e. that God will give the house the strength and the existence. Cogan writes that in Mesopotamia, celebratory names were given to doors and gates, with their names being a request from the gods for protection and blessing. He also notes R.B.Y. Scott's opinion that the names of the columns are based on the first word from a complete sentence which was carved on each column. The first, quote, "He will establish the throne of David and his kingdom for his offspring forever," end quote. And the second, quote, "In the strength of Yahweh shall the king rejoice," end quote. Sweeney notes that when read from right, i.e. north, to left, i.e. south, the names produce the phrase, "In strength he establishes," which suggests that the columns symbolize the foundations of the earth and the stability of creation, as we see in Micah 6:2, Isaiah 24:18, Jeremiah 31:37, etc.
I just want to mention, I know this is a much later development, but for sure, I think Masonic designs from Masonic traditions are looking at texts like these. And if you notice, there's one of those, the two pillars. I read this, it reminds me of many of them. They have these two pillars and even Catholic churches too. Cathedrals have these two primary, these pillars that mean something.
No, that's totally valid. It's something that, I mean, part of the reason that some degree of biblical literacy is good for people is because there's so much symbolism in art and literature that harkens back to it and plays off of it. The problem is not knowing what the Bible says. The problem is this ridiculous idea that you have to take it all literally and absolutely, and that it comes from a virtuous God, and that you have to, contort yourself into whatever understanding your pastor wants you to have, which is never honest or justified by anything real.
Yeah, and I should also note Fritz, who writes that there is no special symbolism in these two names, and one cannot assume that they were inscribed on the pillars. Both designations identify the pillars as persons and seem to have originated in folklore tradition that personifies the elements of the temple visible on the outside.
Yeah, and I think if you're into tarot, you might know that there's a card called the High Priestess, and there's normally like two pillars with a B and J on them. That's supposed to be Boaz and Jeff.
Yeah. Okay, on 23, the sea, in Hebrew, Hayam. Its exact purpose is not mentioned. According to 2 Chronicles 4:6, it was used by the priests for washing. Cogan, however, writes that if this was the case, then entering it required the use of a ladder or step ladder, which makes the interpretation more difficult. Which makes the interpretation more difficult. He postulates that that from the Yam they would fill the lavers and take water for the purposes of the temple. Sweeney suggested that the Yam might provide water for washing the entrails of sacrificial animals, as we see in Leviticus 8:21 and 9:14, and that it might serve a symbolic function, perhaps to depict the sea from which creation emerged, or the sea through which Israel passed on the way from Egypt to Israel, in Exodus 14 and 15. Fritz, however, rejects viewing the sea as a symbol for the primeval ocean, and writes that it was used for cleansing purposes.
I mean, yeah, it's the reason for it is definitely still up for question, because like, I mean, what's right under it? It's the oxen, right? Mm-hmm. Which would represent the tribes of Israel. The 12, yeah. So it is interesting what this may have been used for. But either way, it's just an enormous basin filled with water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and I added that based on the measurement measurements of the sea, circumference of 30 cubits, diameter of 10 cubits, it is concluded that pi equals 3, which is consistent with Babylonian mathematics at the time. Yeah.
Divine wisdom. Pi equals 3.
Well,
God
there is...
sure is a dumbass.
Well, the thing is, like, yeah, they wouldn't have been like as exact as we are today about it. They just would have been like, yeah, it's roughly 3 times.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've noted this, that there is an interesting observation that is made with the use of gematria. So there is the word vekav. It is surprising. I will grant you that. So in the Kirei, you have the word vekav, and the Ketiv has vekava. I think it means, vekav means like completely round. No, sorry, high or something like that. Measured, something like that. It can be debatable, but the point is that kaf vav hey is equal to 111, and kaf vav is equal to 106. So if you divide 111 with 106, you get 1.047169. And if you multiply that with 3, you get 3.141509, which is accurate to 4 digits. Now, because I've done my research on pi when I done my project on Machin-like formulas. If this is very accurate for the time. So, and I've read an article called the Bible and Pi by Michael A.B. Deacon and Hans Lausch, and they write, now either the rabbinical tradition is responsible for pi 2, which is a different which is the gematria presented here, and the author of 1 Kings surreptitiously coded into his text an extreme accurate value of pi, or else we have a most remarkable numerical coincidence. Which is it? The question is not one susceptible of being decided absolutely one way or the other. We incline to the view that there is a most remarkable coincidence at work here, and that it has no significance beyond this. Of course, not everyone will agree with us, and they point out their reasonings next.
I mean, the creative differentiation is medieval, right?
I guess
it's like Masoretic. So it's possible that someone at some point was like, oh, this number, is, if I were to, someone who's into like, gematria or whatever back then, they might have realized that this number is similar to, like, if I were to take this number and divide it by itself, I get something that's quite close. What happens if I change one of the letters and times it by that? And so when I have like 2 variations of the same word, times it by itself, and 3, and then I get an accurate of pi that would have been known at that time in history.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, and then like just added that letter as an alternative reading. So like it could have been.
Yeah,
encoded,
it could be, but the issue, the issue is that I don't know what the dating is for the Kerenkative tradition, so I can't really say for sure if
it's
that
definitely
was
not.
the intent.
I don't think it goes back that far, as far as I'm
No,
aware.
I don't think so as well. No.
Yeah.
Well, you know why it's not 3.14592654, etc., instead of just 3.
Well, I mean, the main thing is it doesn't say pi is 3. It says the circumference is this, the width, the diameter is that, but it also says, that the what does it say? It says
it was 5 cubits high.
Yeah. No, but it also says, wait, which verse is it?
23.
33.
23.
No, that 23. Yeah. So you made a tank 10 cubits across and 30 cubits circumference, but it also says that the brim was
the brim was round, 10 cubits from
Agor
brim.
Saviv, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't know how wide the brim is and where the measurement of 30. And also, it's very possible they're just rounded numbers. Like they weren't trying to show us what pi is. They're just saying it was about 10 cubits across and about 30 cubits in circumference.
But the bottom line is this would not be a perfect circle, right?
I'm saying it could have
Okay,
been.
so my guess
don't-
is that they would even call like an oval round,
Okay.
like
That's
something
also
that's
true.
like not. It doesn't have to be exactly.
I mean, it says complete. It chooses to say completely round, so maybe it is supposed to be a circle. But like, I don't think there's not much to read into it. It's not like, oh look, they didn't know pi. It seems to me it's just like, here is a circle. It's 10 cubits across from brim
Why
to
not? They
brim.
describe an oblate spheroid as a disc.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also noted.
God wanted to play frisbee.
I've also
Like,
noted.
think about it. If they were to use an accurate number for pi, either the circumference number is going to be a weird number, or the diameter is going to be a weird number, right? You would have to say like 30 and a half cubits or something like that, or 30 cubits and 10 hand breaths or whatever, and 2 fingers, because it's a bath.
But then it depends on whose fingers, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, these were standard measurements back then. It's like feet, right? It depends on whose feet, but then at some point, everyone
Depends
uses
on
the same foot.
Yeah. I've also cited Maimonides on Discord in his commentary on Mishnah Iluvin 1.5, and you said, you should know that the ratio of the diameter of a circle and its circumference is unknown, and it can never be exactly known. And this is not due to a lack of understanding from us, as some of the fools think, but rather that it is naturally unknown, and it's unrealistic that it will be known, but it can be approximated. Basically saying it's irrational.
When did he write this?
He lived like 11th century, I think.
Okay.
12th century.
That makes
12th
sense.
century.
Okay. That makes sense then. Okay.
Yeah. And my final comment on this section is 12 bulls in verse 25. The exact purpose of the bulls is unclear. Ishodad wrote that the oxen, quote, allude to the perfect structure of the created world, end quote. Cogan writes that bulls were the main work animals in ancient economics, and thus were symbols of strength. Sweeney suggested that the bulls symbolized the 12 tribes, though he writes that this is uncertain. He writes that the 4 cardinal points of the compass symbolize all creation, and the bulls symbolize strength and virility.
Did we mention that Mormons use this description of the exact description and height, size, and stuff from this verses to create their own what they're called again? They use it for baptism. So like Mormons do baptism in the temples in their temples with baths that are like on 12 bulls and made of bronze or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, or maybe they only do it for baptisms of the dead. I don't remember. But
Okay.
maybe we should ask them what pi is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm done here. Please continue, Mark.
Okay.
Finish the chapter.
Picking up on verse 27. He also made 10 bronze movable stands. Each stand was 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. The stands were constructed with frames between the joints. On these frames and joints were ornamental lions, bulls, and cherubs. Under the lions and bulls were decorative wreaths. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles and 4 supports. Under the basin, the supports were fashioned on each side with wreaths. Inside the stand was a round opening that was 1.5 feet deep, and it had a support that was 2.25 feet long. On the edge of the opening were carvings in square frames. The 4 wheels were under the frames, and the crossbars of the axles were connected to the stand. Each wheel was 2.25 feet high. The wheels were constructed like chariot wheels. I thought God didn't like chariots. Their crossbars, rims, and spokes and hubs were made of cast metal. Each stand had 4 supports, 1 per side projecting out from the stand. On top of each stand was a round opening 3/4 of a foot deep. There were also supports and frames on top of the stands. He engraved ornamental cherubs, lions, and palm trees on the plates of the supports and frames wherever there was room, with wreaths all around. He made 10 stands in this way. All of them were cast into one mold and were identical in measurements and shape. He also made 10 bronze basins, each of which could hold about 240 gallons. Each basin was 6 feet in diameter. There was one basin for each stand. He put 5 basins on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north side. He put the sea on the south side in the southeast corner. Hiram also made basins, shovels, and bowls. He finished all the work on the Lord's temple he had assigned by King Solomon. He made the 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped tops of the pillars, the lattice work for the bowl-shaped tops of the 2 pillars, the 400 pomegranate-shaped ornaments for the lattice work of the 2 pillars. Each lattice work had 2 rows of these ornaments at the bowl-shaped top of the pillar. Then the 10 movable stands with their 10 basins, the big bronze basin called the sea with its 12 bowls underneath, and the pots, shovels, and bowls. All these items King Solomon assigned Hiram to make for Yahweh's temple were made from polished bronze. The king had them cast in earth foundries in the region of the Jordan between Sukkoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all these items unweighed. There were so many of them, they did not weigh the bronze. Solomon also made all these items for the Lord's temple: the gold altar, the gold table on which was kept the bread of the presence, the pure gold lampstands, and at the entrance of the inner sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, the gold flower-shaped ornaments, lamps, and tongues, the pure gold bowls, trimming shears, basins, pans, and censers, and the gold door sockets for the inner sanctuary, the most holy place, for the doors of the main hall of the temple. When King Solomon finished constructing the Lord's temple, he put the holy items that belonged to his father David, the silver, gold, and other articles, in the treasuries of the Lord's temple.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of inventory.
The word of the Lord. Honestly, this stuff becomes so mind-numbingly boring when you're just reading through it like a list. But I didn't get to say earlier, remember, every time you see a bull or oxen, it's almost certainly a reference to Aal, the Canaanite northern god, and some idol sacred to him, because he was one of the gods that made up the Jewish god, once we'd done sort of Frankensteining that bitch.
Yeah, and not just Canaanites, but I think Egyptians also made use of one of the many epithets of their gods as the bull.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Powerful horned creatures.
Yeah.
I always found this ending of this chapter very weird. So you have like the 10 lavers besides the sea, and then he's like candelabras, 5, like another 10 of this, another 10 of that. And it's like, yeah, but in the tabernacle, there's 1 candelabra, 1 golden incense altar, 1 laver, 1 table for the showbread, which isn't even, I don't think it's even mentioned here, right? Or does it say 5 of them? 5 of them. Oh yeah, table for bread of display, blah blah. So he makes like 10 of them, and then so in the tabernacle there's only 1 of each, and then it seems in the second temple there's also 1 of each. So it's like, why in Solomon's temple is it just like this like weird extravagance of having 10 of them?
Like, I mean, it's supposed to be emblematic, whether in reality or just in the repetition of the numbers. And I mean, I don't know, maybe that was a leftover Israelite thing, 10 tribes, yada yada yada. But I just think it's funny that like God is supposed to like live off of smells. Like they bake the bread fresh and lay it out on the on the special tables for God to like scent it while it still smells good, and then once it's sat there for a while the priest can eat it. it's kind of, it's like God doesn't eat food. He eats things.
Yeah. But the point still remains, though, that God is being fed something.
He
Right?
is. He is
Yeah.
indeed.
God,
Just
he
and
needs to eat. If he's going to be around.
he just eats with his nose. Perfectly natural.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So I did have a note on verses 45 through 46. So when they're talking about like where they're getting all the stuff from, there's actually some interesting archaeological background here. So I'm gonna mispronounce this, both of these actually. So the place Zarathan.
Zartan.
Yeah, so it has been identified. It hasn't been 100% identified, I should say, but it's been hypothesized that so not that far away from the Jordan, there's a place called Tel Es Saidea, and I know I butchered that. You don't have to tell me. So the place itself, there is evidence of its existence from like the 12th century. There are Egyptian and Hittite tombs there. Not many Hittite tombs, but at least a couple. And the identification is based on the fact that they had places to like make like a whole shit ton of bronze. Like the burials included a bunch of bronze too. So if I could just cite this this is from Archaeology and Biblical Interpretation. And this is what they have to say about this. At the top of the mound, a well-planned settlement was revealed with a street system and structures of the four-room type. The settlement has been ascribed to the 10th century BCE, but like I said, I'm going to go over it a little bit more. To the 10th century BCE, its identification as the biblical Zarathan, a center of bronze manufacture where some of the vessels for Solomon's temple were made, would point to its importance. Pritchard ascribed the water system to 1200 to 900 BCE. And then it says here, we assume that it should be ascribed to the principal occupational phase of the planned settlement on the site, i.e. the 10th century BCE. So while that is an assumption, the archaeology reveals that while the place existed from around the 12th century, it was destroyed in the 8th century, and we know that from carbon dating some of the wood there, which I thought was super interesting. So this place would have actually been a place that someone would have gotten bronze from.
Where did you say it was located at?
Hold on, I can pull up a more
because I think other commentators identify it differently.
Okay, sure. Let's see here.
Hello says 18 kilometers north of Adama, wherever that is.
Okay, so it looks like Tel Saideh, situated about a mile to the east of the Jordan River. This mound of 20 acres rises to a height of 40 meters above a vast plain of arable land that is once again being made productive by water which flows through the East Gore Canal system.
Yeah, Cogan, at least in commentary from LeYisra'el, writes that it is usually accepted to identify it with Tel Asaidia in the valley of Sukkoth. That is according to the words of Rabbi Yochanan in Yerushalmi Sotah 7:5. And he notes that the distance between Tel Asaidia to Tel Adam, which is Tel Adamye, which is 18 kilometers, i.e. 12 miles. And
I said that, Tomer.
Oh, did you? And Fritz identifies it with Tel Hamad. Writes it has to be located in Tel Hamad. Okay. Okay, so I'll start on verse 27, movable stands. Fritz comments, the description of the stands is not clear in all its details, but the artifacts found at Megiddo and at Larnaca, a cypress, provide a good impression of the appearance of such cultic items. According to this evidence, the stands were of a square shape, with 4 wheels fixed on each corner girder. Between these corner girders, figures of lions, oxen, and cherubim were attached. On top of the square stand, there was a round supplement on which the specially made basin was placed. The description is influenced by the sheer amazement about the artistic work. The fixing of the cast wheels onto axles is mentioned especially. Next to the animal figurines, the decoration with geometric patterns is stressed. Maybe they were spiral-shaped bands, which are known from elsewhere for the decoration of metal objects. On verse 38, bronze basins. According to 2 Chronicles 4:6, the basins were used to wash the parts of the burnt offerings. Fritz writes that this practice would explain the mobility of these stands and their relatively high number. Gersonides wrote that the basin was used to wash the hands and feet of the priests, much like the practice during the wilderness period in Exodus 30:17 through 21.
Yeah, I just want to say that the Hebrew text says that they are 4 cubits by 4 cubits by 3 cubits high, but in the Septuagint and Josephus it says that they are 5 by 5 by 6 cubits high. So not only do the measurements don't. Sorry.
Which verse?
This is the size. Verse 38 mentions that the lavers are 4 cubits. That's the diameter. The stands are in verse 20. Verse 29. 27. 27. Verse 27. 4 cubits in a height of 3, but apparently the Septuagint and Josephus say that it's 5 by 5 by 6 cubits high. So not only do the measurements not match, but also the actual shape, right? The Masoretic text has got it that its height is shorter than its length and width, but the Septuagint has the opposite, where it's 5 by 5, and then it's taller than it's wide. It's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so on verse 40, pots, shovels, sprinkling bowls. Sweeney comments, verse 40a completes the notice of Hiram's work with the listing of basins, scrapers, or shovels, and sprinkling or pouring bowls. The basins, in Hebrew kirot, may be pots, sirot, used for cooking or incense. Compare verse 45. The shovels are to remove residue from sacrifices and incense, and the sprinkling or pouring bowls are for libations and purification, as in Numbers 19:13 and Ezekiel 36:25, or to sprinkle blood on the altar, according to Exodus 24:6, 29:16, and Leviticus 1:5, or the people, according to Exodus 24:8 and Leviticus 7:14. On verses 41 through 45, this list summarizes all the vessels created for the temple. Cogan writes, quote, "The list resembles an inventory, suggesting that its original provenance may have been the temple treasury or storehouse. At the same time, the temple's royal benefactor would also have an interest in documenting his contributions." End quote. On verse 46,
it does read. I would say that this does read a bit like someone saw something in real life and described it, and bits that they didn't really understand or see, they either left out or made up. Like the cherubim in the inner holies, probably, who knows about where they got the idea from, but whatever.
Okay, on verse 46, Sweeney comments, "Suitable clay is found en masse in low-lying areas near water, such as the Jordan River, which would allow the molds to be formed in deep pits of clay, so that the molten bronze could be poured and dug out after it had hardened. The location in the Jordan River plain between Zaretan, an uncertain site located south of Bet She'an along either bank of the Jordan, And Sukkoth, likely identified with Deir Allah along the east bank of the Jordan, makes sense since extensive clay deposits are found in this region. On verses 48 through 50, several commentators take these phrases as to be an addition, which serves to glorify Solomon. Fritz writes that for some of the items, the use of gold makes no sense. He writes that this was a later compilation which lists items used for the temple service, but for which it is not possible to determine its exact use. Cogan adds that the list's separation from the general description of the vessels which Hiram made is not explained. Moreover, it is not told as to who created the golden vessels, nor is anything said about their design, like the bronze vessels. He suggests that the list was added based on the list of vessels which Nebuchadnezzar seized, 2 Kings 25:16, though there the vessels were made of silver and gold.
That makes a kind of sense that they would use Babylonian records of plunder as reference if they had access to them when trying to sort of retcon what had been there.
I mean, it's also possible, like, when they say, like, made from gold, they could have been talking about, like, alloys, right? Pure gold isn't really a thing.
It doesn't hold up well, and they wouldn't have been able to purify to the levels that we do today when we consider pure gold.
Right, like I think the sort of, like, 24 karat gold, for example, is not, I don't even think that's considered 100%. But no one really uses 24 karat gold for anything, so it would be too soft for most things.
Yes, it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what the number is. What the number is for gold. I think it's like either something like in the 600s or something like that. But yeah.
And finally, 51, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, and he placed them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. DeVries comments, this extract from the book of Solomon's Acts mentions two things that appear nowhere else in the material concerning the temple. One is the sacral booty, literally holy things, kedashim, consisting of silver, gold, and valuable artifacts, evidently confiscated by David in his various wars and designated as booty dedicated to Yahweh. Compare 15:15. The other is the treasure rooms, in Hebrew otzarot, which may be a functional description of what verses 6 and 8 calls the stories. Now, the only Christian that I have here is, there is Ishodad, but Bede is having a field trip on this chapter. I mean, basically, everything he sees is basically has to do with Christianity somehow. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll give one example. The pillars symbolize James, Cephas, and John, who proceeded to the coming of our Redeemer to bear testimony to his coming. The two capitals...
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. And the two capitals which were placed on these pillar tops are the two testaments which holy teachers are bound both in mind and body to mediate on and observe. And just, yeah, that kind of stuff.
How is the three pillars not the Trinity? Why didn't you default to the Trinity instead of the three main bro apostles that Jesus totally wasn't in a polycue with?
Yeah, I mean, just to make an argument that, the two pillars are the two testaments is very anachronistic. I don't see how they don't see that. Like there was no New Testament during the time of the composition of this. No one would have ever read that into this just because you have two things.
Wait, it's not like what it matters what it meant at the time. God is just magically drawing together his mythos and foreshadowing all the things he's going to later copy. But it was all intentional and also is proof of magic.
Yeah, I'm done here. I'm not going to cite all of what Beat said.
I'm sure there's tons of ridiculous shit. Wait, is there one more like super ridiculous thing that you could pick, just not on the authority of who said it, just on the basis of the craziest shit?
I mean, I found another one.
What's your favorite? Come on. Give us
I'm not going to say the favorite, but I just found one. The 4 wheels are the 4 books of the Gospels, which are aptly compared with wheels, because just as the wheel can travel with the greatest rapidity wherever it is steered, so with the Lord's help, the word of the gospel filled all the regions of the world.
Oh, God.
So you steer the gospel. That's an interesting
Why are
analogy.
Christians so completely full of shit?
Well, it's a long and powerful tradition. It's a prestigious line of work with a long and glorious tradition of shoveling shit and then covering it in gold. And it's profound. Very profound.
Yeah, if I haven't read this yet, I don't think I have. Ariana the Heathen says, "Thank you all for a great Bible study."
Aww.
Thank you very much for saying that, Ariana.
So the next chapter is about 66 verses, so
Yeah, we're not doing that today.
yeah, of course.
I'm starting to go cross-eyed from the lists of gold-plated bullshit.
Gold-plated bullshit. Yep, buckle your seatbelts, kids. That's what we're in for.
Oh my God. At least we know where Trump got his decorating scheme from.
Yeah, well, no, because he would have had to have read this.
Oh, no, he doesn't read. But maybe he saw a picture book one time.
I think the
Was it
picture book
man,
Bible would
woman,
have been even
elephant?
harder to believe.
I mean, yeah, but he doesn't really have the brain power to.
Okay. All right. So we are doing, what was it? First Kings, what is it? 8?
8.
Yes, 8.
Yes. First Kings 8. Next week, next month. All right.
They're going to bring in the magic box and melt all the Nazis' faces off.
Excellent.
No, it's basically Solomon addressing everyone and saying, "Hey, I'm cool." Or something
Oh,
like
so
that.
Oh,
our
good.
faces are gonna melt off. Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's gonna be that's the dedication, right? It's gonna be
Yeah.
it's gonna be crazier.
Yes.
So I should stock up on gummies for next week is what I'm hearing.
Well, what there's gonna be a very large sacrifice, a very, very
So
large
alcohol because blood magic, everybody drink. Okay, got it. Next week,
Lilith, you're
use-
so lucky that you're in Canada.
I know. Hey, I look, if we can sneak you guys out of hell and into the land of the free and the home of the weed, I would be happy. Just brush up on your hockey nomenclature. Do not insult beavers. And learn the joy of Timmy Hose.
You know, I know that it's called a puck.
And don't say about, say about.
A boot.
A boot.
No. It is not a boot. Okay, unless you're going to like Eastern Ontario. It is about. We pronounce both of the vowels, and because y'all say a bat, you hear the ooh as the only thing.
Okay.
A boot it is.
About.
All right.
About.
A boo.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Join the
See you next
Discord.
week.
That's
Join
what you
the
should
Discord.
do. Join the
Come to the
I'm
Discord.
there.
Subscribe to
Yeah.
Milwaukee Atheists. There
Yes.
you go.
After lunch.
So yeah, I looked
Peter.
up like Phoenician or Sidonian stuff like
Does
the
Peter even
name.
know?
No
No,
one's
he
saying
doesn't.
bye or
We
something.
did say bye, you bozo.
Oh, okay. Bye.